says and glon mo creepia moa nan fosa avort no mara I to chimmy shadow.
The Song of the Yellow Crocus. Love and honour in the Highlands, where memory blooms, true love burns. Arhane Hygeia. Summary. Scotland, 12th century. The Highlands endure under English rule, where the mist conceals secrets, and the echoes of clans mingle with the roar of the wind. Coinneach MacCoinnich, laird of his lands and descendant of the royal MacAilpein line, has sworn he will never kneel. But when his son is taken by treacherous hands, his warrior heart shatters, and his oath becomes destiny, to reclaim him or die trying. Nòraidh MacShimidh has lived in the shadow of a father who repudiates her, and a name that marks her as an outsider in her own land. Stripped of all protection, she discovers that her destiny lies not in England but in the mountains where men fight for honor and loyalty. There, amidst royal secrets, kingly intrigues and oaths as weighty as swords, her life will intertwine with that of a man shaped by war and loss. The love that blooms amid mist and steel will be tested by the fury of clans and the ambition of crowns. Yet, like the crocus that blooms in the harshest snows, fragile and radiant, so too will burn a bond capable of redeeming everything, a delicate symbol, an oath impossible to break. Can Nòraidh find in the heart of a Scottish warrior what her own blood denied her? In a world scarred by betrayal and pride, is it possible that love can become the most powerful of alliances? Epigraph. Love and honour in the Highlands, where memory blooms, true love burns. There, amidst mist and steel, two souls find their destiny. Prologue. Creag Dubh, Scottish Highlands, Anno Domini 1115. Coinneach MacCoinnich, laird of the clan and descendant of the mighty sons of MacAilpein, paced his chamber back and forth with the impatience of a young warrior before battle. The imminent arrival of his child carried with it a long-denied hope, the end of the bloody feud that, for more than 30 years, had pitted the MacCoinnich against the MacAilpein. How could old MacAilpein look into his grandson's eyes and not yearn for peace, he told himself, a spark of hope gleaming in his chest. He had endured a year of Isabel's coldness and silence, his wife, daughter of that enemy clan. A year of hard looks and sealed lips. And yet the creature struggling to be born was a bridge stretched between them. Perhaps the child would redeem them. Perhaps she would not be able to look at him without tenderness. Perhaps he himself would finally learn to love her. But every muffled cry, every stubborn silence beyond the walls of the upper chamber, pierced him like an invisible dagger. His mother had died giving him life, and that memory had haunted him like a spectre since childhood. What if history repeated itself? What if his desire for an heir led her to the grave? Merciful God, he murmured, his hands clenched behind his back. Let it not be I who kills her. Suddenly, the air of the tower trembled with a miraculous sound, the vibrant cry of a newborn. Coinneach stopped short, his heart on the verge of tearing his chest apart. The door opened, and Aillis, Isabel's maid, appeared with tears of joy. A boy laird. You have a son. Coinneach could barely breathe. The child's blood bore not only the name of MacCoinnich, in his veins flowed as well the heritage of the MacAilpein, that island clan whose alliance could seal peace in the Highlands. But there was more still. Through Isabel's maternal line ran, faint yet undeniable, a trace of the ancient blood of Dunshalan, the same that for centuries had worn the crown of Scotland. That child, without knowing it, had been born with a destiny kings would not tolerate. He was no mere clan heir, he could become a banner capable of uniting Highlands and Isles, and in his figure some might see a right, however remote, to aspire to the very crown. The echoes of that lineage would soon reach ears far too powerful. In his heart faith burned, his son would be a promise of peace, not an omen of war. He could not suspect that that first cry would mark the beginning of the storm. The maid's words hurled him up the stairs with the fury of a hurricane, 2 steps per stride, until he nearly collided with Blanid, the aged midwife who had welcomed him into the world decades before. You cannot enter yet, she warned, blocking his way with outstretched arms. Is she alive? He roared, his soul hanging by a thread. She is weak, but she endures. Your son is strong, Coinneach. Listen. The warrior held his breath, and perceived like a murmur of the gods the baby's babbling. His son. Flesh of his flesh. But when Blanid lowered her gaze with sorrow, Coinneach's heart darkened once more. Does she still hate me then? He asked in a thread of voice. She has suffered greatly, the woman replied gravely. Give her time, lad. That is all. With a knot in his throat he stepped back. Pride and hurt tore at him, but he knew he would cross that door in the end. That child was his. It was not long before they called for him. Coinneach burst into the chamber and saw her, Isabel, pale as a ghost, standing with the child in her arms. She could barely hold herself upright, and yet she stepped forward to place the infant against his chest. That simple gesture shattered every wall of resentment. A son, he whispered, tears in his eyes as he gazed upon the small, wrinkled, perfect face. But Isabel's voice cut him short. Leave us, Blanid. I wish to speak alone with my husband. When the door closed behind the midwife, a tense silence spread through the room. Coinneach, absorbed in the miracle he cradled, scarcely noticed that Isabel had moved toward the stone window. You should rest, Mograd, he said gently. Tomorrow you can show me whatever you wish. She turned. And in her eyes burned a dark fire, impossible to decipher. I wanted to show you that I survived, Coinneach. I thought giving birth to your son would kill me. But I am still here. Her broken laughter froze the blood in her husband's veins. Thanks be to God, he stammered. I do not know how to make amends for what I have done, but I will try. I swear it to you, Isabel. She shook her head. I only want you to see me. To know that the very thought of ever giving you another child destroys me. She wrapped her arms around herself, trembling. Never again. Coinneach's world collapsed when he saw her lean toward the emptiness beyond the window. Isabel, for all the saints, step away from there, he bellowed, clutching the child in desperation, not knowing where to put him. She looked at him one last time, tears in her eyes. You have killed me, Coinneach. And she threw herself into the abyss before he could reach her. The roar that tore from his chest echoed through the entire tower. He sank to his knees, his son pressed against his heart. The little one cried, terrified by that scream of pain, while the laird MacCoinnich remained broken before the open window, cursing war, blood, and the cruel destiny that had stolen his wife at the very instant life had given him his son. The night the lady of the MacCoinnich chose death, the wind howled as if ancestral spirits had descended from the Highlands to witness her fall. No one but God saw the moment she threw herself from the battlement, leaving behind a strangled cry and the dull crack of flesh against stone. In the gloom, her husband found her lifeless body still warm, and held her with a wordless despair. There were no words, no plea to heaven, only the certainty, carved into the deepest part of his being, that this wound would never close. But when the first rumors slipped through the castle walls, the husband's desperate love twisted into accusation. The MacCoinnich killed her. Thus the lie was born. In the courts of Scotland and England, the tragedy was swiftly turned into a weapon. They said the child, scarcely more than an infant, could not remain in the care of a man capable of spilling his own wife's blood. They said the clan deserved a worthy heir, and that the boy must be torn from his father's stained hands. None of them admitted the truth. What they truly coveted was the blood running through his veins. For the boy's mother had not been an ordinary woman. Her lineage was entwined with that of the Dun Shéileán, and through her maternal line, with houses that swore fealty to both Scotland and England. A son born of such a union could claim alliances, lands and rights no king was willing to leave beyond his grasp. Davy of Scotland and Eanraig of England, though enemies in so many struggles, shared the same fear, that the MacCoinnich would raise his heir and turn him into a banner capable of challenging crowns. The child had to be taken. The father, broken. And the clan subdued. It was not hard to find someone willing to open the gates from within. With a heart poisoned by envy and hunger for power, he agreed to weave the betrayal. Thus, while the lady's body had not yet grown cold in the family tomb, the child's fate was already sealed. What had begun as an intimate tragedy was becoming a game of kings, treachery, and blood. And over the heather-covered hills, the shadow of war began to rise. Chapter 1. Castile Fiannic, Anno Domini 1121. Someone was watching her. Nòraidh felt it before she heard anything. She froze mid-motion, the damp fabric of her petticoat clenched in her hands. A dry crack, the snap of a branch under the weight of a boot filtered through the ferns. She jerked her gaze toward the shadows of the forest. Midnight darkness swallowed everything. Only silence, thick as the mist creeping between the trunks, answered her ears. An unnatural silence, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. A shiver ran down her spine. Someone was there. She knew it. Common sense whispered that she should return at once to the safety of the tower. But months of slipping out under cover of night without consequence had dulled her caution. That night, like so many others, she had left the castle unseen to bathe in the river. No one ever asked where she went. No one seemed to care. Her father had wanted only sons, he ignored her, and that indifference had become a strange kind of freedom. But freedom did not mean safety. And Nòraidh valued her life far too much to offer it to the jaws of men or beasts. She bent over the rock where her clothes lay. She searched desperately for the dagger she always hid among them. Her trembling fingers rummaged through the damp linen. Nothing. No trace of the cold iron blade. "For the love of Christ," she muttered through clenched teeth. Another crack, closer. Her heart burst against her ribs. She did not need a weapon, she needed to run. Then 3 shadows surged out of the trees and rushed toward her. Nòraidh let out a piercing scream and ran. One of her worn slippers flew backward, and tore a curse in a foreign tongue from one of them, but she did not stop to see the damage. Her bare feet bit into mud and stone as her breath tore at her throat. "Help!" she cried into the night, hoping the gateguard, that drunken fool, would not think her screams were part of a dream. The men's footsteps thundered behind her, ever closer. Panic gave her wings. She took the path by the stream, the old oak standing to one side like a dark sentinel. She prayed her pursuers would stumble over its roots and break their necks. Pain stabbed her side, but she could not stop. Ahead, in the distance, rose the silhouette of Castel Baal MacAilpein, black against an even blacker sky, just as distant and unreachable as the protection of her own father. She would not make it. Fear was choking her. Then the murmur of the stream, and the mist hovering over its waters, offered a flicker of hope. Perhaps the men could not swim. Perhaps the current and the fog would hide her. A hand brushed her thigh, tearing the fabric of her nightgown. That touch was enough. She leapt into the icy water without thinking. The odor ripped the air from her lungs, the cold bit like 1,000 blades, but she swam with all the desperation of her soul. She reached the far bank gasping, hair plastered to her face, clothes turned to lead. "Thank God," she whispered as she crawled onto the shore. Behind her she heard heated curses. But they did not follow her. Not yet. Nòraidh understood that if they knew the land, they could overtake her farther on, where the stream narrowed. She could not risk it. Instead of running toward the castle, she turned into the thicket. Logic dictated otherwise, but she knew the unexpected was her only salvation. She stumbled onward, soaked and exhausted, the petticoat tangling around her legs. Each step was a silent plea to the heavens. Her heart hammered like a war drum. And then she collided headlong. With something. With someone. The impact knocked her down. Dazed, she looked up. A man. A giant of a man, so tall he seemed hewn from the very stones of Caledonia. The moon barely outlined his shape, but the strength radiating from him was unmistakable. Others closed in around him. Rough laughter, teeth gleaming in the gloom. "By the Highlands, you've nearly killed her," one said with a sneer. "Bah, she'll recover," another replied. The guttural cadence of their voices left no doubt. Scots. Damn Scots. That was her last thought before darkness claimed her. Chapter 2. Between the king and the barbarian. The scent of grain enveloped her, golden fields endless, rippling beneath the moon. Nòraidh ran through them, light as the wind, until she felt her feet no longer touching the ground. For an instant she thought she had died, and passed through the gates of paradise. Had they already killed her? She did not think so. A moan echoed in her ears, perhaps her own, and the certainty that her body was broken, torn apart, pierced her like a white-hot iron. She was not dead, she could still feel. "Run," she commanded herself. "Run." But when she opened her eyes, she discovered the truth. She was not running, she was being dragged inside a sack of grain. The rough remnants of the wheat stalks clung to her face. The air grew scarce and panic, ravenous, consumed her. Were they going to drown her right there, as one does with an unwanted animal thrown into the river? No, the sack was not weighted with stones. And yet the footsteps were moving away from the riverbank, deeper into the forest. Darkness closed around them like a shroud. Nòraidh struggled furiously, screaming until her throat felt flayed raw. Curse them, her captors seemed deaf to her cries. A hysterical laugh burst from her chest. Her father's prophecy had come true. He had always told her that one day she would damn herself by her own choices. And that day had come. She should never have gone out alone that night. She should never have left Alicet behind. How foolish she had been. "Let me go," she howled, pounding the sack with fists and knees. "By the blood of Christ, let me go this instant." She fought like a cornered beast, tearing the air with her screams. "Soulless dogs, faithless bastards. Let me go." The men's laughter was her only answer. It only fed her rage. If she managed to escape, she swore she would tear their eyes out with her bare hands. But then a thought froze her blood. Her dagger, her only defense, had been left by the riverbank. And then she understood, she was half naked. Anger mingled with fear. Could she have offered them a clearer invitation to violate her? No one would mourn her absence. Perhaps her father would notice after a week, if at all. That man had always shown more interest in entertaining his Scottish guests than in his own daughter. Perhaps he would regret it only because she possessed the fatal gift of earning his contempt. She gathered her strength once more, but her resistance was punished with a brutal knee driven into her side. Curse those pagans. She would not be silent or submit, even if they beat her, until she was nothing but shattered bone. Then new voices rose around her. The sack was suddenly opened, and her body was thrown to the ground like a useless bundle. She fell face first, dizzy, and when she pushed herself up she saw before her a pair of bare, powerful legs. A giant. Yet another. She lifted her gaze, defiant, and met steely eyes filled with mockery and arrogance. She had seen that look before countless times, the gaze of those who judged her unworthy. Very well, she thought, let that damned Scot despise her as much as he pleased. He was surely already planning how to finish her off. Coinneach MacCoinnich watched her with cold detachment. She did not look like a count's daughter, but like a castaway hauled back from the dead. And yet her eyes, in them burned the insolence of her lineage. Impertinent girl. She stood like a cornered hare, ready to bite. And though her ferocity was the first thing to catch the eye, Coinneach had not missed that fleeting flash of pain that crossed her gaze when she first looked at him. Pain and then defiance. The beast bared its fangs once more. And to make matters worse, the young woman had dared to let her gaze linger on his legs with barely disguised boldness. Blessed Christ! If she had lifted her eyes just a little higher. Though scarcely covered by a soaked shift, the girl seemed oblivious to the spectacle she offered his men. Moonlight traced her form with cruel clarity. Coinneach frowned, forcing from his mind the images that threatened to set him ablaze, legs locked around his waist, a body arched with passion, lips pleading. By all the saints, he was a man. She was exactly where we were told she would be, his cousin said with satisfaction. Oh, was she? Coinneach replied in a rough voice, fractured by a desire he despised feeling. No. He did not desire her. He must not. Desire for a woman like that would bring only ruin. He crossed his arms over his chest and looked at her harshly. Is it your custom to bathe beneath the gaze of God and men alike? He did not know why he asked the question. Perhaps because that very recklessness had allowed them to capture her. Perhaps because the thought tormented him more than he cared to admit. She lifted her chin, refusing to answer. Her dark eyes flashed with untamed rancor. The ferocity of the creature surprised him. Not even his enemies challenged him so openly. But he soon remembered why he was there. Rage over his son's capture tightened his jaw once more. Have you no tongue, woman? He snapped. Nòraid straightened then like a phoenix rising, fire devouring her veins. And have you no decency? She spat, her voice sharp as steel. Then with a flash of haughty scorn, Scot. Coinneach almost laughed at her audacity. What concern of yours is where I bathe? The warrior raked her with his gaze, incredulous that someone so fragile would defy a MacCoinnich so brazenly. Your tongue is far too sharp, maiden, he replied coldly. Would you like me to remind you what it might cost you? She smiled with ferocity, anger burning on her lips. Then prepare yourself, for you will have no tongue at all once my father learns of this. Though everything inside her screamed for her to retreat, Nòraid held her ground, lifting her chin with defiant pride. For an instant the man seemed surprised by such resistance, before arching a brow with a smile that froze the blood. Truly. His voice was a blade edged with mockery. A shiver ran through Nòraid as she felt his gaze roam over her with insolent boldness, with a desire so blatant that no one had ever dared show her before. Danger wrapped around her like a dark mantle, yet to her own dismay, alongside fear there rose a different shiver, more unsettling. Had she struck her head so hard when she collided with that colossus, that she had lost her wits? She turned to the other men staring at her slack-jawed, mouths hanging open like fools. What are you doing, trying to catch fireflies with your mouths? She shot at them disdainfully. The ridicule was such that the men hurried to shut them, exchanging embarrassed glances. The band's leader laughed with scorn. By the saints' relics. Now I understand why your father lets you wander at night. Perhaps he hopes the darkness will make you lose your way back. The words struck her heart like a blow. She swallowed her pride, holding back the fury and the tears that threatened to betray her. That barbarian had no idea how close he was to the truth, nor how much it hurt. My father will have you all beheaded for this outrage, she replied, though she felt with shameful disquiet. His eyes slid over her again slowly, accompanied by a crooked smile that enraged her and unsettled her. Something about him confused her. Instinct screamed that he was pure danger, from his savage bearing to the ferocity of his gaze. And yet there was in that shadowed face a strange familiarity, a spark that made her doubt her certainties. Who are you? She challenged, folding her arms as if the thin nightgown and the darkness could protect her. The man did not answer, merely watching her with that insolent expression. Nòraid pressed her lips together. Have Scots no tongues then? For a moment he seemed taken aback. Then he burst into a deep laugh that disarmed her. The others did not share his amusement, but Nòraid felt even more confused. Anyone else, her own father included, would already have slapped her for such insolence. You have dared speak to the MacCoinnich, one of his men growled. If I were you, I'd choose my words carefully, woman. Nòraid went pale. MacCoinnich. The name made her step back, not in fear but in indignation. He was no ordinary savage. He was the savage. The son of the man her father had taken in by DV of Scotland's command, later handed over to English wardship. She had seen the boy, she had seen the pain in his eyes. How dared this man present himself here, when his own son had arrived at her castle battered and broken? Scoundrel! How dare you show your face? MacCoinnich raised a brow with fierce calm. I have come to reclaim what is mine. Did you truly think I would leave my son in England's hands? Nòraid felt her blood boil. Yes. You will leave without him. My father will never hand him over, even if he does not care for the boy. Not even he is so foolish as to defy King Eanraig by returning a child to such a monster. The accusation hardened him. His granite features tightened, and Nòraidh with cold satisfaction waited to see him sink beneath the weight of guilt. "Your son is under the protection of King Eanraig himself," she added, noting the flash of fear in his eyes. "By tomorrow he will be beyond your reach." MacCoinnich's jaw drew tight as an iron snare.
"What have you done to my son?" he suddenly roared, advancing on her like a storm.
Nòraidh retreated, her heart hammering in her chest like a war drum. "Me? Nothing. He came to us that way, shattered, broken. What did you do to rob him even of his voice?" The giant hemmed her in with the force of his gaze. The closeness stole her breath, yet within that fury she sensed something unexpected, not the threat of an executioner but the tearing grief of a father. Perhaps the stories she had heard about him were not entirely true. Even so, his power was terrifying. With a growl he spat a torrent of curses in Gaelic and ordered, "Tie her to the strongest tree. I do not want her escaping before dawn." The men seized her at once. "No!" Nòraidh screamed. "My father will flay you alive, MacCoinnich." The Scot turned, a dangerous shadow crossing his face. "So you are precious to him?" The question struck her like a dagger. Her lips trembled, but she did not yield. "Of course. I am his daughter." A heavy silence fell between them. Did he know the truth? Was he mocking her with that dark look? He fixed his eyes on her again. "You said Eanraig will come tomorrow to take my son. Where does he intend to take him?" Nòraidh met him with an empty smile. "Far enough that you will never see him again."
"Where?" he pressed, his voice like thunder.
She faltered for a moment, lowering her head. I don't know." MacCoinnich studied her in the shadows, as if he could unravel the lie within her.
"It does not matter," he pronounced at last with terrifying calm.
"Eanraig will never set eyes on my son." Then, without taking his gaze from her, he gave the final order. "Silence her. I do not want to hear a single word more from that English mouth." Chapter 3. Never in all his life had Coinneach MacCoinnich known a woman so turbulent, and so insolent. He was eager for dawn to come, so he could deal with MacShimidh, for he could not wait to be rid of her. The sooner, the better. And yet, although the urge to send a messenger at once to reclaim his son burned in his gut, if it was true that King Eanraig would arrive the following day, this was an opportunity far too valuable to waste. He was not a man to let chances slip by. It was said the English king travelled light, with a reduced escort, and that worked to his advantage. Coinneach commanded nearly 40 men, more than enough to unsettle the arrogant MacShimidh. Yes, he could wait. In the meantime, he would keep that insolent woman bound and gagged, lest she incite his men to mutiny, or drive him himself to commit an even greater folly. What a shameless, stubborn, and brave creature! She had dared to step forward in Arthur's defense. Against him. A gesture as absurd as it was stirring. She claimed the boy refused to speak. Coinneach reasoned it through. His son's silence was not born of betrayal but of fear. Arthur was still a child, no matter how hard he tried to posture as a grown man. MacShimidh's daughter blamed him for that silence. Yet the ferocity of her words made him think that in truth, she had no part in that treachery. Or was she trying to protect her father? No, she did not seem to fear him, but to venerate him, as though he were a champion out of legend. The young woman spoke of him like a hero, and fully expected Coinneach to be flayed alive the moment MacShimidh caught up with him. The savagery of that tongue left him torn between amusement and astonishment. "Are you trying to catch fireflies with your mouth?" she had thrown at him. Coinneach had not been able to hold back his laughter. The look on his men's faces in that instant was worth a king's ransom. Yes, he would have to keep a close watch on her. But first he needed to retrieve the clothes she had left by the stream. He could not allow her to go about barely covered by a nightshirt that concealed very little. The mere sight of her skin distracted him from what truly mattered. By the holy name, it was impossible to tear his eyes away from that nearly naked body. What kind of father allowed his only daughter to wander the woods like Eve before the fall? Had she been his daughter, Coinneach would have locked her in a tower until her wedding day. Impertinent, proud, untamable, that was what she was. While the band of outlaws snored around the campfire, Nòraid lay awake. The cold seeped into her bones, her back pressed against the trunk of a tree, her arms bound and a filthy rag with a nauseating taste wedged between her lips. Damn Scots! She would not have slept regardless. Anxiety and the bitter certainty of her misfortune weighed too heavily upon her. Why had she not remained in her chambers like the other ladies, spinning under a maid's watchful eye? Why could she not be what her father wished her to be? Because in truth, she had never known what her father wanted of her. And with equal certainty, she sensed she would never manage to please him. Perhaps he no longer even wished it. A pang pierced her as she thought of what would become of her if her father refused the exchange. The Count would never hand over the boy, not for her. Rejection had always been his answer, and Nòraid knew it in the deepest part of herself. She did not care, she told herself, hot tears burning in her eyes. No, she did not care.
But the truth was that fear was devouring her.
If she failed to escape, what fate awaited her among that pack of men? With horror she realized they were not four as she had first believed, but many more. Bodies in the gloom, merging into one another in the darkness like corpses piled in a pit. There were too many. They had dragged her to the camp as she screamed like a madwoman, and the leering looks of those barbarians had marked her so deeply that she swore she would never again meet a man's eyes. Especially MacCoinnich's. A shiver ran through her as she recalled the way he had looked at her. There was something in those eyes, green-blue, that was not ordinary. Curse him. There was nothing ordinary about that unbearable man. He had not yet returned, and for some reason she did not wish to admit, that unsettled her more than she cared to acknowledge. It was not trust, not exactly, but the distrust she felt toward him was different, less savage than what the others inspired. MacCoinnich and a man named Angus had left shortly after, perhaps to spy on Bale and Aquilia's defenses. Yes, her father would most likely face them without mercy. Nòraid harbored no illusions. Those men would have to keep her, whether they wished to or not. Unless she froze to death first. Then she heard it. Voices. Footsteps in the thicket. Her stomach clenched as she saw the two men return. They approached the fire, murmuring. The flames crackled, casting strange shadows across their faces, and MacCoinnich stood tall and imposing in his black wool tunic, the plaid cinched by a belt, his loose hair falling like a dark mantle over his shoulders. Tall, fierce, born to command. Was he a killer, as well? The very thought dried her throat. Angus roused another man, and the two of them disappeared into the shadows, leaving Nòraid alone, and MacCoinnich. When she realized they were alone, her heart slammed against her chest. He was watching her. The flames danced in his eyes and hardened his features even more, as if he were carved from iron. Nòraid closed her eyes, praying he would not be able to see her, so far from the fire's glow. But her plea went unheard. The clan chief bent to take something by the fire, then straightened and walked toward her. A tremor of pure panic swept through her entire body. Tears burned. Instinctively Nòraid let her head fall back against the tree trunk, and cursed silently, closing her eyes as if asleep. She knew she was acting like a fool, and yet she could not stop herself. She could not face him. Not now. She did not know why, only that she could not. Tears burned in her eyes. Am I precious to him? The echo of MacCoinnich's voice murmured in her mind. The question was a torment. She had to remind herself that she had not heard those words, that it was only her imagination mocking her, humiliating her. The subtle crunch of moss beneath leather-soled boots told her he was standing before her. Nòraid knew it without opening her eyes. With her legs bare. The thought burst in unbidden, and her heart lurched. MacCoinnich bent beside her, or so she believed. She was certain she felt the warm brush of his breath against her cheek. A sigh. Or had she imagined it? Good heavens, is he looking at me like that, she thought, her heart racing wildly. She feigned calm, tried to believe he was not so close, that he was not watching her with that searing intensity, but she failed. She knew it. And she blessed the darkness for hiding the blush that rose from her chest to her face. Suddenly, her heart missed a beat. The man had touched her. And how, by the Holy Virgin? Her breath broke when MacCoinnich's hand came to rest on her cheek, in an unexpectedly tender caress. Without thinking, Nòraid leaned her face into the warmth of his palm, and only then did she realize what she was doing. Her eyes flew open, and with a start she lifted her face. The gazes met. They were caught in one another. He did not withdraw his hand. And she, though stunned by the gesture, could not protest, not with the gag pressing against her lips. She could barely breathe, much less think. MacCoinnich traced a slow path with his thumb along the hollow of her cheek. She closed her eyes and tears threatened to spill. How absurd, she thought, that it should be this man, her captor, a stranger, the first to touch her with true gentleness. "Do not cry," he murmured. Was she truly crying? She tried to deny it, and nearly broke into sobs. She had not even noticed. The Scot removed the gag, sniffed it with a grimace of disgust, and tossed it aside. "That idiot Angus," he growled, shaking his head in displeasure. Nòraid swallowed. Her voice had deserted her, but it did not matter. She would not have known what to say. Up close, MacCoinnich's face lost none of its masculine hardness. It was hypnotic. Too young to be a clan chief, she thought, though the silver strands at his temples contradicted that notion. For the first time she noticed those silver hairs were braided. How many winters had he lived? His face suggested barely 26, but his hair added 2 more decades. He had high cheekbones, a straight and proud nose, and lips made for stealing kisses. His eyes, in the half-light, were an even more dangerous mystery. Nòraid's heart pounded in her ears. "You have my word I will not harm you," he said, his voice deep, almost hoarse.
Do not be so sad.
The touch of his hands on her cheeks confused her even more. Why such kindness? She did not know how to react. Suddenly she jerked her face away.
It is not true."
MacCoinnich raised an eyebrow. "Were you not crying?" He withdrew his hand sharply. Nòraid shuddered, convinced he would strike her for denying it. But instead he brought his thumb to his lips and bit it gently, tasting her tears. "Are you certain?" he asked, never taking his eyes from her. The gesture made her tremble. The way he looked at her, the way he disarmed her with a simple silence, forced her to take refuge in anger.
"Yes.
I was not crying." "True," he nodded, still bringing his thumb to his mouth. "You are far too intrepid to cry, are you not?" Nòraid licked her dry lips and swallowed hard. "In any case, you have my word, nothing will happen to you." She closed her eyes, trying to erase the image of that man bent over her face. "How magnanimous you are," she whispered, with a tremor disguised as sarcasm. "Meanwhile my hands are bruised." A shadow of a smile curved the Scot's lips, a smile that stole her breath and made her heart hammer fiercely. She should have wanted to slap him. God curse him. And curse her for feeling undone before a beautiful face. "There are necessary things," he said, without a trace of guilt. "But I will give you some relief." He straightened and untied the bindings at her wrists. "How generous for a godless Scot," she spat. He let out a low, enigmatic laugh. It only deepened Nòraid's confusion. Why did he not rage at her insults? She could not fathom him. He freed her, but then slid his fingers along the curve of her back. She cried out, startled. "Stop! What are you doing?" He did not apologize, nor did he remove his hand. His fingers burned, even through the thin fabric of her nightgown.
"You are soaked," he said.
"Oh, truly?" Nòraid snorted, shooting him a blazing look. "How strange. I wonder if it has anything to do with the fact that you abducted me while I was bathing, without letting me dry, and then threw me into a damp corner far from the fire." She tried to pull away, in vain. "Take your hands off me." "You are immodest," he said with a frown, though his eyes glittered with amusement. But he obeyed, withdrawing his hand. Did your father strike you often? The wound was immediate. No, she snapped, holding back the knot of pain in her throat. The truth was crueler. He had never cared enough about her to raise a hand against her. She looked away, forcing herself to say, "How dare you speak of my father? He never." She rubbed her numbed fist, seeking relief. But her heart remained raw. "Perhaps he should have," he said darkly. "How dare you," she shot back.
"Let me see your hands."
She said it softly, but it was a command. "I can see them well enough myself," she replied angrily. He sighed. "As you wish." "Exactly. As I wish. You are stubborn and insolent. And you." She fell silent when she saw him raise his hand. She braced herself for the blow. But MacCoinnich only draped a warm tunic over her head. His tunic. The fabric felt familiar, worn, imbued with his scent. It was dry and warm. He had taken it to the fire for her. Astonished, she let him help her put it on, smoothing the folds as if dressing a child. Her throat tightened. No one had ever done such a thing for her. No one had ever cared for her with such attention. Her heart ached beyond bearing. She could not believe that her captor, MacCoinnich, treated her with such tenderness. He watched her in a strange way, as if he wished to read her soul. And then his expression hardened. "Put your hands behind your back," he ordered, his voice steely. Nòraidh shot him a look he would never forget. MacCoinnich inclined his head. "Do not force me to use force." And she understood that he could. She bit her lips in fury. "You are a scoundrel," she spat, fire in her eyes. The Scot let out a brief laugh, as if the young woman's fury scarcely brushed him. His good humor was, for him, an invisible armor. A cursed armor. "So they say," he admitted without a trace of remorse.
"Now put your hands behind your back."
"I must tie you." "Why can you not leave them free?" Nòraidh protested. Even so, she obeyed. Better to gain time. Better to choose her battles carefully. She wished she knew how many enemies surrounded her. Perhaps she could draw it out of him.
"What do you fear from me?" she asked with feigned indifference.
"You must have at least 50 men." MacCoinnich lifted his gaze evasively, his lips barely curved in a smile. The scoundrel knew exactly what she was trying to discover, and had no intention of granting her even that small victory. "As for your hands, woman, I am not so foolish as to leave them free. I need to sleep, and I have no intention of playing nursemaid to a little lady who cannot even keep her mouth shut." He bent toward her, and secured her wrists to the trunk with a knot less cruel than the previous one. "I regret that Angus was so rough with you," he said as he checked the rope. Nòraidh cursed him silently. That unexpected courtesy only added discomfort to her humiliation. "Do you truly think I can sleep like this?" she snapped. He held her gaze, unperturbed. "I have already told you. There are things that are necessary." Nòraidh tried to settle as best she could on the hard ground, seated at the foot of the tree, her back against the rough bark, searching for a scrap of impossible rest. It was then that he, as if the binding were not enough, crouched to smooth the fabric and arrange her skirt, covering her legs with a gesture so unexpectedly careful that it utterly disarmed her. Fury burned in her throat. She did not want to feel protected, least of all indebted to that man. Was this how he treated his son as well? With patience, with such care? The sting of envy pierced her chest. Because with every gesture MacCoinnich laid bare the truth, her father had lied. That man had never raised a hand against the boy, nor against her. And that certainty brought both relief and pain. She realized too late that he was watching her closely. "What are you staring at?" she demanded irritably. His lips twisted into a half smile. "The obvious." Nòraidh arched her brows. "Are you wondering whether I am good to eat?" she spat venomously. "I warn you, you would find me very bitter." The Scot's smile widened. A curious thought, but no. Suddenly his expression hardened. He lifted a hand, and calmly brushed a rebellious lock from her face. Nòraid nearly tore his fingers off with her teeth. He parted the damp strands with his fingertips, looking at her shamelessly. "I was only wondering what you were thinking about, girl." Girl. The word spoken in that deep cadence ran down her spine like a dark caress. "About nothing," she lied, choking back her anger. "Only that my father—" He finished the thought with a sigh, tucking the lock behind her ear. "I know. He will tear my eyes out." Then he removed the plaid that girded his waist, and placed it over her. Nòraid suppressed a shiver. The wool still held the warmth of his body, and his scent enveloped her, sun, horse and man. She caught herself wondering whether the Scot's skin would be sun-bronzed or pale, and in her imagination she saw him naked, shaped by the elements, his torso marked by fatigue and strength. The vision scandalized her and made her blush. Her traitorous heart hammered, when he without further ado stretched out before her and laid his head in her lap.
"For God's sake, sir, what do you think you are doing?"
Nòraid cried. He smiled shamelessly and even winked at her.
"Sleeping naturally."
His dark hair like silk spilled over her thighs.
"Not on top of me."
"Ah, but you have my plaid, girl," he replied in a warm, reasonable voice.
"Where else then should I rest?"
"In a tree for all I care," she spat, squeezing her eyes shut. But the image rose unbidden in her mind.
"And stop calling me girl," she roared.
The moon reflected in the man's eyes. "As you wish, girl."
"But tell me, what should I call you then?"
Nòraid understood, he was mocking her. She would sooner hang herself than reveal her name. "Idiot. Take your damn plaid. I do not permit you to lie with me. Move away." His features softened into a rogue smile. "You are mistaken. I do not intend to lie with you, but upon you. And no, I will not move. There is no better way to keep you warm and protect you from all harm." "To watch me, you mean?" His smile broadened, pleased. "That too. Arrogant scoundrel. I could spit in your face, and believe me, I am tempted." "You could," he admitted calmly. "But in that case I would be obliged to send Angus to keep watch over you in my stead. And I am quite certain my lascivious cousin would take great pleasure in using a proud Englishwoman as a pillow." To underscore it, he buried his face deeper in her lap, rubbing his nose against her thighs. He inhaled deeply, sighing in contentment like a child after stealing a trove of sweets. Nòraid's stomach clenched violently. Something deep and treacherous awakened within her, burning beneath her skin. "Well, if you so wish Angus to attend you," he began as if about to rise. "No." Nòraid screamed, horrified. The Scot laughed softly and settled back again. "I thought so. Good night, girl." He lay back once more, as if nothing were amiss, his head in her lap, innocent as a son beside his mother. But he was not innocent, nor was she his beloved.
"Wretch," she glared at him.
"By my soul, all the evil I fear comes from you." "Then you have nothing to fear," he replied lazily, turning on his side and flinging a heavy arm over her leg, as if seeking a comfortable place. That arm was as broad as Nòraid's thigh. "In any case," he added in a grave voice, "you will only have to endure me for this night. Tomorrow you will be back under your father's care." Nòraid clenched her teeth in fury. The desire to slap that arrogant face, to sink her teeth into his flesh, burned her from within. "Get away, beast," she shouted, struggling uselessly against the ropes. The curse that escaped her lips was as bitter as her helplessness. "Ah, maiden, does your father know that your tongue can be so foul?" MacCoinnich asked, with a mocking glint in his voice. "That is none of your concern. Make yourselves comfortable if it pleases you so," Nòraid spat, fighting the urge to scream. She knew waking the host of that man would be a fatal mistake. "There was no need to order me," he murmured with insolent calm. He had the audacity to close his eyes, as if she did not exist. Nòraid felt the urge to box his ears. She tried to draw her legs away, but the Scot's colossal weight pinned them. She exhaled, frustrated, and summoned in her mind every curse she had ever heard. "Madman, pig, scoundrel, curse Scot." MacCoinnich's lips curved into a sleepy smile. Nòraid frowned in fury. She needed a deadlier insult. Beast, demon, devil with black entrails. Your eloquence is refined, he replied without opening his eyes, as if that rosary of insults were praise. Blood rushed to her face. You will never see your son again, she spat in rage. In an instant, the spark of joviality vanished from his face. His eyes remained closed, but his features hardened. For your own good, girl, you had best hope that I do. The words sank into her chest like molten iron. Desperation flooded her. There was no lie in his voice. Her father would never negotiate. That condemned her. Condemned forever. After a silence that grew unbearable, MacCoinnich's deep voice emerged, tense. If I believed you would speak to me honestly, I would ask you how my son fares. Nòraid watched him in secret. Though he feigned sleep, the clenched jaw and rigid features revealed the truth. That man bore anguish carved into his face. Damn it. She wanted to hate him, but she could not deny him that single certainty. No father deserved such torment. She sighed angrily. And if I had the mind to answer you, I would tell you that he is alive and in decent condition. No one mistreats him, not by our hand. He refuses to speak, nothing more. She saw the tension ease just a little in the Scot's face. And she felt a pang in her heart. Envy. Envy of a child loved by his father. Something she had never known. Thank you, MacCoinnich murmured, almost inaudible. And nothing more. Nòraid looked away abruptly, trying to ignore the intimate presence of that stranger who had claimed her lap. She had never been so aware of another human being. Safe again beside my father. How absurd. Safety, she now understood, was not merely the absence of danger. It was warmth, affection, a protective embrace. Things she had never felt. She forced herself not to look at him until she heard his steady breathing, the faint snore that confirmed his sleep. Anger rose again. He well deserved to be spat upon. Even to be covered in drool, like a satisfied dog. She tried to wriggle free of his weight, without success. The cursed man held her trapped beneath the yoke of his body. Perversely unbearable. But the worst was the contradiction that assailed her. How was it possible that this man, who by all logic should have been the cruelest of her enemies, was the only one who had shown her a glimmer of kindness? It made no sense. None of it did. And even less sense did the thought that pierced her, when she lowered her gaze to the all-too noble profile of her captor. She realized, with a shiver, that she did not even know the color of his eyes. What would happen when her father rejected him, when he refused to negotiate? A chill ran down her spine. Was it fear? She did not wish to think of it. Her last lucid thought, almost a childish lament before surrendering to sleep, was that she felt like a lost child, because she had just asked herself with an absurd pang in her chest, whether MacCoinnich would decide to keep her with him. God forgive her, that that foolish idea ignited within her a forbidden spark. Something far too irrational and dangerous to call by its name. Chapter 4. Coinneach forced his body to rest, but his mind rode untamed throughout the night. In the half-sleep, the certainty of this place kept him awake. He heard the steady rhythm of the young woman's breathing, finally surrendered to sleep, and he sensed the unease that shook her when phantoms haunted her dreams. He understood well the torment of those muffled sobs. His own nights had also been haunted by demons since Arthair's abduction. The girl was afraid, he realized then, and remorse stabbed him like hot iron. She was too proud to bow her head in wakefulness, but dreams do not lie. Still, he could not help but admire her. Enemy flesh, yes, but with the courage of a she-wolf who had faced him without hesitation, even defending Coinneach's own son. He did not wish to resort to chains or straps that would humiliate her, yet fate offered no other choice. He would do whatever was necessary to bring Arthair back. At first light he opened his eyes but did not move, fearing to break the maiden's rest. He remained still, attentive to the sound of her breathing and the faint feminine scent that filled the air. An ironic smile crossed his lips as he recalled her indignation when he had dared to lie too close. He had not planned such audacity. He only intended to share the ground beside her, not upon her. But that intoxicating fragrance and the vision of the young woman had reduced him to his most primal instincts. And when, kneeling before her, he heard her stubborn defense of freedom, and saw her rub her sore wrists, an unexpected feeling assailed him, tenderness. She was not as strong as she appeared. He vowed then to return her safely to her father. Had she been another woman, and in other circumstances, perhaps he would have wanted to know her better. He inhaled her scent once more, and his body responded as if under a spell. He looked at her with a furrowed brow, fighting the call of flesh. She slept with her head tilted, her features softened by the dawn's dim light. Yet he remembered her fierceness, upright, fists clenched, eyes blazing. May her father tear out my eyes, eh? He thought, surprised to catch himself laughing quietly. What a woman! Her hair, the color of smoldering peat, fell in a tight braid, though a few rebellious curls spilled across her forehead. Coinneach had to withdraw his hand to resist taking them and bringing them to his mouth. He closed his eyes forcefully, invoking discipline. He must not think of her mouth, nor her body. Not now. And especially not when it was MacShimidh's daughter. Carefully, he leaned toward her. He held her as he untied the bindings on her wrists. Once freed, the young woman slid to the side. He gripped her firmly, noting the reddish marks the ropes had left. He had taken care not to tie them too tightly, yet the skin was damaged. And still, not a single complaint had escaped her lips. He took her hands in his, and began massaging them with a surprisingly delicate awkwardness. He discovered they were not soft hands but calloused, like those of a Highland woman, not an English damsel. When he lifted his gaze, he found the young woman's eyes fixed on him. They were a deep brown, like the dark mouth of an ancient cavern. Eyes that promised secrets. What was this daughter of the enemy hiding? She jerked her hand away abruptly and sat up sharply. Do you not have a negotiation to attend to? She inquired, her voice rough with sleep, arching a brow. Or have you changed your mind and decided that you cannot set me free? Coinneach looked at her with feigned calm. You are a nuisance, girl, he said with a half smile, though without conviction. Did you really think I would risk my son just for the warmth of a woman's lap? I am not so foolish. She rolled her eyes and hugged herself, returning a look of disdain. Of course not, she replied with venom. We are talking about your son, a boy. I wonder if you would do the same for a daughter. The Scotsman fell silent for a few moments. Finally, he narrowed his eyes. For any of my blood, he said gravely, and for any member of my clan. Could you say the same of your father? The young woman smiled, haughtily. We shall see. That gesture, that spark on her lips was a challenge. A contradictory creature, noble in bearing but with the hands of a peasant. Coinneach looked away and asked nothing more. It was not his concern, he reminded himself. With a gesture, he ordered Beethan to watch her while he awaited the return of his men. He walked in circles, feeling the girl's murderous gaze fixed on his back. He tried to push her presence from his mind, focusing instead on the impending negotiation. The signal came soon enough. MacShimidh finally appeared on the battlements. The Count arrived cold and proud. For a father whose daughter had been captured, his demeanor was unsettling. Coinneach lifted the girl's boot, which his old Thomas immediately handed to him, ready to throw it as proof of her captivity. But the Englishman's voice stopped him. So you have my daughter. And well, MacCoinnich, what do you demand of me? Coinneach hesitated for a moment. That question. Something about it unsettled him, as if air was slipping through his fingers. He forced himself not to let emotion take hold. My son in exchange for your daughter, he roared, tossing the boot. The boot fell ignored at the Count's feet, who erupted in laughter. My daughter, he repeated mockingly. By the wounds of Christ. What do I care for that maiden? I have plenty of children, and still the strength to father more. He slapped his belly with a haughty hand. Keep her, MacCoinnich. I will keep your boy. I am not foolish enough to anger the king over a woman who has brought me nothing but trouble. The world darkened for Coinneach for an instant. He could not believe what he was hearing. With a voice of thunder, he replied, "Be careful, MacShimidh. If you refuse my offer, your daughter will not see the nightfall." Her voice before kings and mountains. The Count smiled with disdain. "Really? Well then." He turned away coldly, ignoring the threat. "I wish you a pleasant journey home." A dry laugh accompanied his words before he murmured something to his men, ending the dispute. Coinneach's horse fidgeted, snorting violently at the tension coursing through its rider. The Scotsman eased the pressure of his knees, trying to calm the beast, but there was no longer any calm within him. He finally understood the premonition that had haunted him from the start. He remembered the girl's words, "I wonder if you would do the same for a daughter." God bless it. He had always known how that man would react. Bile rose to his chest, and he clenched his jaw in fury. He would not yield to that arrogant son of a devil. "MacShimidh!" His voice thundered, slicing the air like an axe. The Count stopped abruptly and turned toward him. "You are going too far, MacCoinnich." "I fear you have no choice," Coinneach replied with a sharp voice. "Send me the boy immediately, or you will also bring about the death of a king." The Count's hands dropped to his sides. There was a glint of interest in his eyes.
"What do you mean, Scot?"
"You will find out." Coinneach lied without hesitation. "My men have surrounded Eanreg's camp. They await my orders. And God is my witness, if you do not return my son today, I will kill your king with these hands." MacShimidh's face hardened. "You lie, MacCoinnich." Coinneach allowed a cold smile to curve his lips. "Do you really not believe it?" His horse reared, reflecting the fury of its rider. Coinneach jerked the reins sharply. "Tell me, are you willing to take that risk? Do you want me to bring your king's bastard here and slit his throat before your eyes? Would you believe me then?"
"Bastard dog," spat MacShimidh.
"You wouldn't dare. And if you tried, what would stop me from handing you over with your son impaled on a pike?" The last strands of control snapped in Coinneach. He rose in the saddle, towering like an enraged giant, every muscle loaded with fury. "Listen well, MacShimidh," he roared. "Touch a single hair on my son, and I will lay waste to every inch of this cursed land. I will not rest until I tear your black heart from your chest. I swear by the stone of Jacob, your blood will soak the soil of Scotland." The Count paled, though he did not entirely yield. He stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Arrogant Scot, what stops me from piercing your skull with an arrow right now?" His men drew their bows, ready to obey. But MacShimidh raised a hand, stopping them. "Tell me the truth before I lose my patience." Coinneach removed his helmet, showing absolute disdain for the danger. A smile of cold certainty curved his lips. "Look behind me, MacShimidh. Do you see the sentry atop the hill?" The Englishman looked up, squinting against the light. His expression changed when he spotted the metallic glint of chainmail in the distance. How many men were waiting there? He could not know. "You cannot stop him from giving my orders," Coinneach continued, relentless. "While we speak they wait. The choice is yours, will you risk everything, MacShimidh?" The Count studied him, face twisted with doubt. "How did you know Eanreg would come?" he asked, trying to buy time. He sent a hurried messenger, but Coinneach stopped him with a sharp smile. "Thank your daughter," he said, letting the words fall like a knife. "And do not even think of warning the king, I have already foreseen it. That man will not take a step before being pierced by an arrow." MacShimidh erupted in impotent rage, cursing the Scots' fate and even Davy of Scotland himself. Coinneach regarded him with icy calm. He knew he had won. "Give me the boy, MacShimidh," he commanded, "and your king will be returned to you unharmed." The Count hesitated. "How can I trust your word? Give me proof." "Proof?" Coinneach replied, his grimace fierce. "Do you want the king's head as proof?" "No, MacShimidh. Like it or not, you will have to trust me." "Trust you? Only a fool would trust a damned Scot." Give me my son, Coinneach said firmly, and I swear Eanraig will leave alive. I want nothing else. Only Artair. Give him to me, and we will leave. The Count burst into another tirade of curses, muttering insults at everything and everyone, before turning to his men. Finally, amid shouts of fury, he relented. Very well. I will give you the boy. Take him and be gone at once. The drawbridge began to rise. Heart-pounding, Coinneach dismounted and advanced toward the gates.
Wait, Laird, Tormod warned. It could be a trap.
But Coinneach could no longer stop himself. At first he didn't see the boy, hidden behind the bulk of a guard. Then a small head peeked out timidly, and a tiny shout cut across the distance like lightning. Father! The world shattered. Coinneach ran as Artair leapt into his arms. They collapsed together in a desperate embrace, and the laird buried his face in the boy's shoulder, choked with emotion. Little one. Artair. I knew you would come, father, the boy exclaimed proudly.
I haven't cried.
I haven't said anything. Coinneach laughed through held-back tears. I know, son. They told me. The boy clung to his neck, and finally, broken by the accumulated tension, began to sob. Coinneach held him tight with all his strength.
Let's go home, Artair, he whispered, his voice trembling.
A touching sight, MacShimidh's venom-laden voice boomed from atop the walls. Take your bastard and get out of my sight. Coinneach lifted his head, and met his gaze with unyielding fire. You kept your word, MacShimidh. I will keep mine. Within an hour, your daughter will be returned to you. No, the Count roared, shaking his head in fury. Keep that harlot. Coinneach froze. If you return her to me, MacShimidh swore with icy hatred, I will rip out the tongue that dared betray me. The laird stared at him in disbelief, still holding his son in his arms. It cannot be. You cannot be serious. Kill her or keep her, I don't care. MacShimidh declared. Just get out of my sight. With one final gesture he vanished, leaving behind a heavy silence that pressed down on the Scots like a curse. Chapter 5. The men seemed uneasy, as they rode away from the fortress. Coinneach knew that in their hearts they celebrated Artair's return, but they had also sensed the shadow darkening his mood. That was why they kept their distance, waiting respectfully for their turn to greet the boy. A rough confusion tore at him. The hostage waiting for his return did not belong to his clan, and yet he could understand the pain and anxiety that consumed her. That empathy enraged him even more, because he felt it as a betrayal of himself. Unlike other times, Artair did not let go. He clung to his back, accepting with shy laughter the warrior's pats and brotherly jokes. Coinneach barely registered them. The proud words of the young woman continued to echo in his mind. She had seemed so certain, so confident in her worth before her father, or had she not? Of course I'm precious to him. I am his daughter, aren't I?
But when she said it, her voice had faltered.
And he had found himself wondering fiercely. Have you changed your mind? Have you decided that, after all, you cannot let me leave? Christ above, that was none of his concern. The girl's father would not carry out the threats he had made in his fury, if Coinneach returned her. She was his blood, his flesh, his daughter. How could he turn her away? With a sudden movement, Coinneach wrapped his arms around Artair's waist, and lifted him to sit facing him, eager to look at him fully. The clan men stepped aside discreetly, granting them privacy. The boy laughed with joy and clung to him again, as if afraid he would vanish if he loosened his hold. Coinneach's heart constricted. I've missed you, my little one, he murmured softly, threading his fingers through his son's golden hair. He had to restrain himself from bombarding him with questions, the traitor's name, the treatment he had received, the unspoken fears. No, it was not the time. Only one truth mattered: Artair was safe. And may God damn him, if he allowed anyone to separate them again. He would question his son later, when he was calm, and when MacShimidh's daughter was no longer his concern. Nòraidh hadn't bitten her nails in years, but now she did so furiously, watching the man called Eachan pace in circles in front of her. He pretended to ignore her, yet every time she tried to move even a few inches, he would turn his head and growl like a mastiff jealous of its prey. She had never kicked a dog, nor would she have wished to. On the contrary, she usually let them into her room and fed them scraps stolen from the table. But at that moment, she truly longed to drive her foot into Eachan. As her laird, he was a brute of iron will and unbearable temper. She wondered if MacCoinnich had already found her father, and what MacShimidh would have said. Even more, she dreaded the moment she would have to face MacCoinnich himself. Because I sense I'll never see my father again, she thought, and yet that's not the wound that bleeds me most. The desperation sprang against all reason, from the terror of being exposed naked to the judgment of that man. In her pride, she had thrown out hollow threats, and he would discover them as soon as she spoke with her father. Why should I care what he thinks? Would he mock her? Reduce her to an object of ridicule? Worse still, pity her? That was what she could not bear. Anything but pity in MacCoinnich's eyes. What a bewildering, arrogant man. Why did he show me mercy? It would have been easier if he had treated her with the hardness of an enemy. Against cruelty, Nòraidh knew how to defend herself. Against compassion, she did not. Why did he call me girl in that tone that seemed affectionate? The timbre of his voice, pronouncing that word, made her shiver in a way that confused her more than the pain. In a single night, he had ripped the bandages from all her old wounds. She and Eachan heard the clatter of hooves at the same time. The guards stopped prowling and turned toward the clan men emerging through the trees. Nòraidh's heart leapt. She fought back tears, but they burned her eyes anyway. She wanted to bury herself under the ground, rather than expose herself to his gaze. Pretending indifference was a farce because the truth was something else. She cared too much what MacCoinnich thought of her. The first to appear was the man called Angers, who waved his hand and spoke vehemently in the Highlands tongue. Nòraidh didn't understand a word, and she couldn't tell whether the emotion on his face was anger or joy. Other men followed, gesturing and speaking with equal fervor. And then he appeared. MacCoinnich. The sight of him riding at the front stole the air from her lungs. In the chief's saddle was Arhane. The laird's son had returned. Her father had made the deal. She was wanted again. Her stomach churned, and the relief was so overwhelming she feared she might vomit. She wiped her tears, steadied herself on her trembling legs, and let out a stifled laugh born of the vertigo of emotion. Her father wanted her back. That thought set her soul on fire. She felt invincible, bathed in a warmth she had never known, drunk with a joy that made her soar all the way to the gates of paradise. Until MacCoinnich laid eyes on her. His gaze pierced her like Welsh arrows. He remained rigid in the saddle, the muscles of his jaw tense, and those amber eyes penetrated her with an intensity impossible to resist. Heaven help her, she could not have looked away from him even if her life had depended on it. Hope on her face. The young woman had cried. Inside Coinneach, a rage flared without any possible explanation. Damn it, she was none of his concern. The sensible course would have been to set her free, and wash his hands of it all. So why did he feel that ferocious urge to turn back, summon her own father, and drive his sword through that bastard's black heart? The moment the girl had seen Arhane on the saddle, her eyes had lit with a joy so pure it disarmed him. There was no pride in her gaze, no trace of resentment, only relief. And that relief struck Coinneach like a dagger in the chest, because he understood what she was thinking. She believed her father had bargained for her. Disgusting traitor. Yes, that was what the man who had sired her should have done. Coinneach lacked the courage to tell her the truth. How could he confess that the heartless wretch had given her up without hesitation, that he did not care what became of her, that he had sworn to tear out her tongue? What kind of father cursed his own blood? No, he could not break her heart. The man who should have protected her had done enough damage already. The hope on the young woman's face was Coinneach's undoing. Or perhaps it was the memory of how she had described him, that cruel father to whom she still clung despite everything. A knot twisted in his gut. Confusion and fury mingled inside him like a strange poison. She stepped closer, more fragile than he remembered. Coinneach wiped the revulsion from his expression. A few words would be enough to destroy her. He pictured her collapsing at his feet, shattered by tears, and the image tore at him. No. He could not tell her the truth. Her voice faltered. Will you take me home now? Her eyes shone with hope, the plea trembled on her lips.
Will you take me to my father?
Coinneach's heart clenched as never before. He felt the insane urge to pull her against his chest, to silence her fears with kisses, to swear she would never suffer again. He also wanted to shake her, to shout that the man did not deserve to be called a father, that she needed no such vile creature. By all the saints, MacShimidh's daughter was the last torment Coinneach needed. And yet against all reason, he felt bound to save her. There was only one way. He did not know what force pushed him as he murmured. No, woman. I will not. She stared at him, bewildered, her back straightening with pride.
What does that mean?
It means exactly what I said. I will not return you to that wretch of a father. His tone was firm, stripped of fury, though the young woman, blinded by indignation, did not hear it so. Coinneach, however, found strength in his anger. Her eyes, wide open, burned with disbelief and outrage. But he gave you back your son. Coinneach laid a hand on Artair's back, as if anchoring himself to that truth. True, he admitted. And yet as his gaze swept over his men, he ordered them in silence not to question him. Astonishment was everywhere. Thomas nearly dropped his jaw in shock. Had he not been so enraged, Coinneach would have laughed at the old wolf's expression. MacShimidh's daughter meanwhile burned with indignation. And he was glad of it. Anger would give her strength. My father fulfilled his part of the bargain, she protested. He clenched his teeth. You mean to break your word, sir, is that it? So it seems, Coinneach lied without blinking. Father, Artair murmured, horrified. A gesture and a firm pat were enough to silence him. How dare you, the girl shouted. Why? Why would you do such a thing? Coinneach held her gaze, a rock in the midst of the storm. It's simple. An eye for an eye. Your father took part in my son's abduction. I return the favor. You're mad. He inclined his head slightly. Perhaps I am, maiden. But you will come with us. My father, she stammered. And then in a voice hard as steel, Coinneach pronounced sentence. Your father can burn in hell. Chapter 6. My father will hunt you down. Nòraidh cried. She could not believe it. She was trapped between disbelief and a fierce joy. For the first time in her life, Count MacShimidh had seemed to risk something for her. And yet that cursed Scot had dared to snatch that spark of happiness from her, breaking the pact just when at last Nòraidh had felt her father acknowledge her as his daughter. No, she would not allow it. By all the gods, she would fight with tooth and nail. As she glanced around, she saw that the laird's men were watching their chief with the same astonishment. Their baffled faces mirrored her own. And in that crack of confusion, Nòraidh found the chance she needed. She did not care how many there were. Never, ever, would she surrender willingly. She would choose death first. Without warning, she spun around, found a gap between the guards and ran for the forest. MacCoinnich's roar of rage thundered behind her. Nòraidh did not stop. She ran with her heart hammering, dodging trunks and roots with the skill of one born among trees. Hooves thundered after her, each stride a reminder that she could not slow. She did not look back. Until fate cruelly stretched a route across her path, her skirt snagged, a torn fabric tripped her and she stumbled. She cursed silently as she struggled free, but she had lost the most precious seconds. In a breath, she was surrounded. And there he was again. MacCoinnich dismounted in a single leap and advanced toward her, his face hard as granite. For an instant Nòraidh thought he meant to strike her, such was the ferocity of his stride. But no, he crouched, yanked her dress free from the root with a sharp pull and then pinned her with his gaze. You will make me bitterly regret this decision, he growled. Nòraidh met his stare with fire in her eyes and returned a savage smile. I promise you that. She straightened as much as she could, wanting to seem taller, stronger. She barely reached his chin, though she had never felt like a small woman. Too many times her father had told her she was too tall, far too unyielding to be a lady. "I should let you go," the Scot ground out. Nòraid arched a brow. "Should you?" "Yes. It would be good to be rid of you. But I won't." She blinked, not understanding. "You won't?" "No." A terrible premonition chilled her. "And why not?" The laird fixed her with eyes where a strange fire burned. "Because my father raised me to be a perfect fool," he spat. "And here I am paying the price." Before Nòraid could reply, he hoisted her as if she were a sack of grain and carried her to the horse. She shrieked indignant, as he flung her onto the saddle without the slightest ceremony. The air was knocked from her lungs. A heartbeat later, the Scot mounted behind her, wrapping her in an arm as solid as an iron bar. He pressed her against him, with the strength of someone holding fast to something he had no intention of losing. "You will regret this." Nòraid swore, panting with fury. "I swear on my life I will turn every one of your days into hell." "I don't doubt it," he replied, his voice rough. Then he snapped the reins. "But remember, girl, I am a man of flesh and blood. Keep writhing like that, and you may discover a far worse demon in me." Nòraid was left breathless, scandalized. MacCoinnich, relentless, barked an order to his men. "Gather your things. We're leaving." Within minutes they were ready, for those barbarians travelled with little more than their weapons and their rags. The column set off, plunging into the thicket. Nòraid, against all despair, lifted her chin. She would not yield. She had survived 20 years without anyone's help. She would return home. And in the meantime she would keep her vow, she would make that cursed Scot regret the day he had dared cross her path. A poisonous sweetness. Spring was late arriving in the north. Nòraid lingered deliberately, letting her eyes roam over the changing landscape while she tried in vain to push from her mind the memory of her father's audacity. How would King Eanraig react when he learned that she had dared to retrieve his son? And worse, that in the same move she had also lost his daughter. Why had he not sent men to demand her return? How could he have trusted a Scot? Damn MacCoinnich, that dishonorable wretch. The trees were greening slowly. Some barely hinted at tender buds, others unfurled new leaves like green feathers, while many remained bare, waiting for the divine hand to restore their color. Nòraid loved that transition. Nature had always been her true home. Her father had called her wild, and such a judgment never hurt her. She knew herself more daughter of Mother Earth than of the Count who had begotten her. Only in communion with creation had she ever felt whole. Yet it had been one of those nocturnal escapes under the starry sky that had thrown her into this living prison. She tensed as she felt once again the closeness of the man riding behind her. She had managed to ignore him for much of the morning, until he, with insolent ease, drew her against him. Nòraid had struggled, trying to gain distance in the saddle, as if an inch of air could restore her dignity. Now, without warning, he tightened his hold again. She stiffened, turning her face to cast him a scorching look. "By all the saints, sir," she exclaimed, fury barely contained. "You may force me to ride in your lap, but not to enjoy your touch." "As you wish, untamable beast," he replied, exhaling a sigh she felt more than heard. "You have a tongue of steel." "Oh, do I?" she returned with poisonous sweetness. "I wonder why." "Because you were born with it, no doubt," the Scot growled. Nòraid was a breath away from slapping him. "And you were born a brute, gutless. You will not ignore that my father will follow you. And believe me, he tolerates no deceit." A tense silence enveloped them. She felt him stiffen behind her, as if her words had pierced his armor. "Really?" he finally said, not averting his gaze from the path.
"Really," she answered, wishing fear would bite him.
Then he drew her helplessly against his chest. "Sit up straight, maiden. Or you'll reach the next ford with a limp." "Arrah," she huffed, twisting. "Relax. I don't bite." "I don't believe you," Nòraid spat, sinking her nails into the arm that held her like molten iron.
Christ alive, you are a beast.
He did not move. Not a flicker of pain, not a sigh of discomfort. Only stone-like silence. Exhausted at last, she let out a breath, and allowed herself to lean against that wall of muscle. "Better this way," he murmured, leaning close to her ear with a low voice. A shiver ran through her, which she hurried to stifle. "All morning without speaking to me," he whispered. "I did not want to trouble you, girl." Nòraidh's heart raced. "How could you not?" she ground out, feigning anger to hide her confusion. The brush of his breath against her neck made her skin prickle. MacCoinnich added no word. "Tell me," she cornered him, unable to endure the silence, "what do you want from me? For me to laugh like a fool, because I've been kidnapped by a barbarian? For me to converse with you, about the wonders of the world?" A low, warm, dangerous laugh rumbled from his throat. "You are fire, not a girl." "I am not a girl," she roared. "And I will not apologize for my tongue." He clicked his tongue. "Quite the temper. Tell me then, about what wonders do you wish to converse?" "About you, not at all," she exploded.
"And stop calling me girl."
She almost said, "You confuse me," but corrected herself. "You irritate me." The Scot laughed again, a sound that drilled into her nerves. He leaned close once more, brushing her ear. "Very well, girl.
Tell me then, how would you like to be called?"
"No," she shouted, jerking away. And discovered, to her horror, that he no longer held her. She had stayed close of her own volition. Shame burned her. "I'd prefer not to be called anything. And by the living God, do not speak to me again." "As you wish. I will remain silent, girl. I have no intention of relaxing." "Do you want to converse then?" She turned her head and caught him smiling, a glint of amusement in his eyes. She fought the urge to slap him. "I told you no." "Decide then, maiden," he replied, still smiling. She glared at him. "My name is no concern of yours." The smile widened, perfect, insolent. "Very well, girl." "Isabel," she lied, turning her face to flee the depth of his eyes. "Call me Isabel, if it pleases you." MacCoinnich arched an eyebrow, amused. "Isabel," he repeated, as if savoring the name on his lips. A sweet name for a wild creature. And Nòraidh knew with a chill that this man was playing a game far more dangerous than war. Chapter 7. Of all the names that maiden might have chosen, Isabel was the last Coinneach would ever have expected to hear from her lips. By all the demons, no other word could have cut him with such a blade. He felt, raw and exposed, the urge to shatter the walls of ice the young woman raised around herself, to make her less hostile toward his people. The last thing his clan needed was another woman consumed by resentment. They had already endured one. Isabel. 6 winters had passed, and still the scars she had left remained open. What would he say to Arhane the day his son asked him to speak of his mother's death? He did not know. He was not even sure he would ever have the strength to do so, for the memory of that morning was the cruelest of his punishments. It was enough to recall the tower window, for sweat to soak his brow and his knees to weaken. His wife had hated him so deeply. Not even Arhane's birth had been enough to anchor her to this world. He closed his eyes, trying to banish the image of that figure before the window. Isabel. The mere act of thinking that name twisted his gut. How then could he bring himself to speak it, to address the girl? He opened his eyes and searched for his son. He had to anchor himself in the future, not the past. The gleam of Arhane's golden hair, lit by the sun as he laughed beside his cousin, granted him a breath of calm. He let the weight of the name sink into the depths of his chest and, like the maiden, retreated into silence, aware nonetheless of his men's inquisitive glances. He knew they were trying to read him. He had left them stunned when he lied about the young woman's father's intentions, but he had had no choice. At the first chance, what would he explain? That he had been forced to deceive them? That he could not bear to wound that girl? Or that this woman, Beautiful, defiant, infuriating, awakened in him an instinct to protect as fierce as the desire she also stirred. Christ, he still wondered whether the night before the maiden had defended his son or herself. Perhaps both. He sensed in her the mark of a life bent beneath her own father's disdain, an existence spent struggling to please a man impossible to please. In her gaze he recognized the same hungers, the same longings and the same fears that had once consumed him as he sought Isabel's favor. All of it in vain. He could not inflict such a wound upon the girl again. She awakened senseless passions in him, the yearning to undo her braid, to sink his hands into her hair until it turned to silk beneath his calloused fingers. He imagined sunlight playing in those chestnut strands that at dawn gleamed like henna fire. And the scent, by God, of sun and fresh grass, of mountain mist when the heather blooms. Like a wolf stalking his mate, Coinneach had to restrain the impulse to bury his face in the hollow of her neck and breathe deeply of her fragrance. He shook his head. He had other matters to think on. He needed to put distance between them. He averted his gaze, seeking his son once more. He needed to speak to him, to embrace him. And instead, there he was, a prisoner of a tongue of fire and an impossible temper. He considered handing her over to another rider, and cursed his own stupidity. Why did it matter so much to him? She was not his wife. Nor did he wish her to be. Damn it all, that tongue could split steel. Yet he did not fully trust his own men. They might tell her what had happened at the castle. No, he told himself. Until he spoke with them in private, until he decided what to say to her, the maiden would continue riding in his arms. Arhane could be content riding beside Angus. It was enough to know him safe. They continued on in silence. When the young woman began to nod, Coinneach drew her against him, an involuntary smile forming at such stubbornness. What a fiercely untamed creature! This time she did not resist. She let herself fall against his chest, and released a sigh of exhaustion. Coinneach smiled, surprised to realize she had fallen asleep in the saddle. She had not rested the night before, and yet she had endured longer than he expected. He held her there, letting her sleep well into the afternoon, struggling not to dwell on how natural it felt to protect her, how right it seemed to have her in his arms. Too much time had passed. Far too much. Her anger as a shield. Wake up, girl. Nòraidh emerged from the haze of sleep, with the vague sensation of warm breath brushing her ear. A word, a name, Isabel, had been whispered against her skin. It was not her name, yet she remembered, confused, that she had used it as a veil. She opened her eyes abruptly, and met a gaze that seemed distilled from usage Beether, the whiskey her father had revered as liquid gold. Amber eyes burning, lit like embers at sunset, their intensity almost unbearable. Isabel, he asked darkly, as if a ghost from the past lurked in that single syllable. Nòraidh sat up sharply, forcing sleep from her body. I'm fine, she replied coldly. She slid forward, freeing herself from the man's imposed embrace until he allowed her to step away. Only then did she realize they were the last still on horseback. Twilight stained the horizon red, and the rest of the group was already setting up an impromptu camp. It felt as though she had barely closed her eyes for an instant, with no intention of sleeping. Where are we? She asked, still disoriented. The MacCoinnich did not lift his furrowed brows from her. We'll stay here for the night, he said in a deep voice, eyes narrowed. Does that suit you? Isabel. Nòraidh felt the hidden edge in the way he pronounced the name. Something in his tone hinted at displeasure, though she could not understand why. With an irritated sigh, she replied. It's a common name, acceptable. One I might even like, if it were mine. He said nothing more. He leapt from his horse and without asking, lifted her with ease to place her on the ground. Nòraidh restrained the urge to curse him, she was too tired for verbal battles. She sank onto a damp log, watching the band of outlaws organize for the night. It was not long before Angus approached her, followed by Arhane, the MacCoinnich's son. With a playful squeal, the boy leapt onto his father's back. Nòraidh tensed, expecting a brutal reaction. But the giant laughed a hoarse laugh, caught the child in one arm, and hugged him close. He knelt, lifting him from the ground, and enveloped him in a fierce embrace, while ruffling his golden hair with incongruous tenderness. Nòraid froze speechless. The boy, until now so quiet, began speaking rapidly in the tongue of his people. She did not understand the words, but she understood the music: trust, joy, love. A warm relief mingled with a sting of envy and pain in her chest. Suddenly her own life felt hollow and resonant, like a cavern without an echo. The MacCoinnich laughed, and the gleam in his golden eyes could have lit the whole night. This man adored his son with a palpable, fierce devotion. A gesture from Angus, a reassuring touch on the chief's shoulder, was followed by a few words. Arhane shouted with joy and clung again to his father's neck, who held him laughing. Then the MacCoinnich's gaze lifted and caught Nòraidh's. Her heart quivered violently. She looked away, fearing to betray what stirred within her.
"What did you tell him to make him so happy?" she asked, feigning indifference, though her voice trembled with betraying curiosity.
The MacCoinnich waited a long moment, giving her time to summon the courage to meet his gaze. "Arhane," he said at last. She nodded, fascinated by that liquid gold gaze under the purple glow of twilight.
"He asked to go hunting."
Nòraid raised her eyebrows in surprise. "And would you allow it?" A barely perceptible smile curved his lips. "Do not be fooled by his angelic face. My son is already a skilled hunter." The pride in his voice mingled with a quieter note: anxiety. He lowered his tone, almost to himself. "He is with his own. No one will harm him. Angus will watch over him." Nòraid blinked. "Angus is your cousin?" "Yes." She studied him for a moment, then looked away.
"I never would have guessed.
You are so different." The MacCoinnich narrowed his eyes, voice dropping to an almost dangerous edge. "Curious. I would not have imagined an Isibale either. And yet that is what you are called, is it not?" A shiver ran through Nòraid. Did he not believe her? Or was he warning her that appearances are masks hiding the truth? "Things are rarely what they seem," he added. Nòraidh's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, sir?" "Only that Isibale is not a name that belongs to you. It does not fit you." She exhaled a breath she did not know she had been holding. She feigned disdain.
"Well, how observant of you."
"If it troubles you so much, you can discuss it with my father. He was the one who chose it." He tilted his head slightly, as if that had revealed something deeper than she intended, and turned toward his horse. The abruptness of the gesture was an unexpected relief. Nòraid needed to mend the cracks in her armor. She knew anger was her shield, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not hate a man who loved his son like that. Chapter 8. He had managed to send the others away, dispatching them to hunt deep in the forest. And Arhane, as expected, had strayed from the group, only to fall naive into his clutches. At last, everything was unfolding according to his designs. Designs delayed far too long, plans that should have come to fruition 6 years earlier when he had driven Coinneach's young wife mad with terror. He had poisoned her with such hatred toward her husband, that the poor woman had chosen death rather than endure the touch of his hands. Pity she had not ended her life before giving birth to the brat. Even so, it comforted him to know that his father's clan remained convinced that Coinneach had killed his wife, for he had been the last to see her alive. That guilt would haunt him like a shadow to the grave, a grave that might not be so far off. Yes, he had made mistakes. When King Devi had asked for his help in claiming custody of Coinneach's son, he had thought he saw the perfect chance to rid himself of the boy. But he soon realized he had gained nothing. The king's purpose was simply to tear the child from clan lands and keep him under English custody, safe even from him. And if anything were to happen to Coinneach, Arhane would be returned to Scotland, protected by the crown? No. The boy had to die. Sooner or later, the brat would betray him. He had already proven it, when, in the middle of the night, he awoke from the stupor of the poison, and he had been forced to lull him with a lullaby. How bitter that song had sounded on his tongue. Enough mistakes. He had waited too long. With his eyes fixed on Arhane, he drew an arrow from the quiver, set it to the bow, and waited for the exact moment. He wanted the child's body to fall hidden among the undergrowth, a clean death without bloodshed, without leaving a trace. Arhane. There you are, exclaimed Ichan, bursting through the thicket. He cursed silently and calmly slackened the bowstring. I was following a rabbit, he heard the boy say. Look, Ichan. I think it went in there. The child pointed to the bush behind which his true hunter lay hidden. Ichan pushed aside the branches, and when he peered in, his eyes met the archer's full on. A shiver ran through him, but he covered it with brusque dismissal. There's nothing here, lad. Go back to the others. Arhane frowned, disappointed. I wanted to make father proud. I want to bring him a rabbit. You won't make him proud by getting lost like a fool, Ichan scolded. Go back to the others, or I swear I'll tell your father you were running off alone. And you won't go hunting again. Don't tell him, the boy pleaded, pouting. Then run. Arhane obeyed, sprinting off among the trees. Ichan waited until he had gone, before turning back toward the bush. I can't allow this, said the archer friend who had joined him in a tense whisper. You won't stop me. I never should have helped you, Ichan spat, shaking his head, red with fury. God judge me, I don't know how I let myself be convinced. You are my only friend, he replied with icy calm. Ichan's face twisted. Not if you intend to murder an innocent. I won't carry your crime. You deceived me, you said you wouldn't harm him, that you only wanted to keep him away. I believed you, but I won't again. I'll tell Coinneach everything. I should have done it long ago. He deserves to know the truth. All of it. No, roared the archer. You can't tell Coinneach that I am his brother. I swore it. And you swore it with me. Only Blanid and you know. I can't let you reveal it. Then I'll do it myself. Ichan turned to leave. You won't, he replied, bending the bow and drawing the string. Ichan stopped and turned slowly. You wouldn't dare. The arrow flew before he could finish the sentence. It buried itself in his heart. Ichan fell to his knees, his hand clenched around the shaft. Damn you. Bastard, he groaned, spitting blood. He approached slowly, contemplating the contrast between the crimson thread at the man's lips and the deadly pallor of his face. You were my friend, Ichan babbled, tears clouding his gaze. Not any more, whispered the archer, without a trace of remorse. And he drove his foot down on the arrow, pinning him to the ground. Ichan's last breath broke in a gurgle. Satisfied, he snapped the shaft and pocketed the piece with the white owl feather. His habit was too well known, he could leave no trace. You should not have betrayed me, he said to the corpse. You would have been rewarded. Now burn in your curse. The joint disappearance of Ichan and the boy would raise suspicions. He would have to wait for another chance. For now Arhane was once again safe, surrounded by his own. He swallowed a growl of rage. Damn Ichan. The maiden's blush. Nòraidh soon found her fury again. The hunters returned with their kills, and though they generously set aside a portion for their prisoner, they wasted no time in finding a sturdy log to tie her to, as if she were a runaway dog. Nòraidh, wrists bound and dignity wounded, settled at the base of the tree, burning with anger, while the men spread their blankets on the ground to sleep. Did they really expect her to rest night after night under such conditions? Never. The MacCoinnich, meanwhile, had not paid her the slightest attention since she had been made to dismount. He had seemed uneasy when the hunters returned. Anger spoke to him briefly, and since then the chief had been sullen, his fury contained in his eyes. Perhaps it was some mischief on the part of the boy, for he went to Arhane, spoke to him sternly, and forced him to sit across from him at dinner. The little boy, head bowed and expression contrite, endured the penitential silence until the father, finally overcome by tenderness, stroked his hair. Then the child threw himself into his arms, hugging the warrior's broad torso tightly. Nòraidh could not help but watch. My God, what a magnificent sight, a father and his son. The MacCoinnich was a man in every sense, broad-shouldered, muscles honed by labor, skin tanned by the sun, dark hair flecked with white at the temples. That mixture of youth and maturity made him all the more imposing. She sighed. If only my own father had ever looked at me with such tenderness. She would have given anything for a rebuke, filled with affection, for a simple gesture of compassion. But no, the Count had never granted even that. Now that, for the first time, he had shown some interest in her fate, negotiating her release at the risk of King Eanreg's wrath, the MacCoinnich had taken even that chance away.
Ah, you could set the moon ablaze with that look, girl.
Nòraid snapped her gaze upward. Thomas, the old man with gnarled hands and a grey beard, watched her with a mocking expression. She shot him a frosty look. I would if I could. Don't you have anything better to do than spy on me, sir? The old man let out a chuckle, which only irritated her further. I see no amusement in this situation, she hissed. Thomas's wrinkles deepened into an enigmatic smile. Ah, but there is much amusement indeed. Nòraid, tempted to kick him, tugged at the ropes.
Why not release me?
What danger could I pose, tied to this damn tree? What is it you fear from me? The old man scratched his beard and shrugged. Frankly, I don't know. He sat beside her and murmured softly, we ask ourselves the same. She glared. And what conclusion have you reached? The old man leaned in, whispering, amused, none, girl. Nòraid huffed, exasperated. Then meditate on this phrase, an eye for an eye. Her lips curved in a bitter smile. Since you've made yourselves comfortable, why not let me go? I promise to serve you a fine drink, as an obedient maiden. She batted her lashes, cruelly mocking the Highland accent. This time Thomas did not laugh. He shook his head.
I have not tried to break your tongue.
No need, she replied boldly. You do that naturally. But admit it, my imitation was not bad. The old man rose, muttering. You are insufferable. I don't understand why the lad insists on keeping you. For me, came the deep voice of the MacCoinnich, throwing Thomas a steely glance. The old man raised his hands. Keep her, Coinneach. I'd rather face swords than that tongue. Nòraid froze. Coinneach. That was his name. To keep her for himself? Her mouth went dry. What on earth does that mean? The MacCoinnich looked at her coldly. You are making friends, girl. She barely nodded, still caught in the echo of what she had heard. He raised an eyebrow, allowing a faint smile to curve his lips. Your head's in the clouds, I see clearly. Nòraid frowned, wishing the earth would swallow her. Suddenly he smiled dangerously, showing his teeth. They say the mind is the first to go. Shall we prepare your funeral? Her cheeks burned. You are the one with the grey temples, she shot back, looking away. True, girl, he replied, golden light in his eyes. True. Boldness slipped from her lips. How old are you? 40. Or more. The MacCoinnich laughed, and the fearlessness of that sound only fanned Nòraid's fury.
Not that old, he admitted with a lascivious grin.
But old enough to recognize the blush of a maiden, and to know when a woman desires even if she denies it. He winked. Nòraid was breathless, indignation choking her voice. How dare you? I dare because I am a Highland barbarian, he replied insolently. Did you not know we all are? You are also rude. And clumsy. Do not forget pig, he added, winking again. She trembled with rage. Damn you. Do you think of nothing else? I'm afraid not. His voice dropped, low and dangerous. When I have a beautiful girl before me, I think of nothing else. Nòraid averted her eyes, heart racing. Scoundrel. Liar. And yet. When she looked up, he was watching her seriously, with an intensity that chilled her blood. He said nothing. And that was what disarmed her most. What if against all judgment he were sincere? Chapter 9. Coinneach hesitated as he took in the anguish reflected in those large dark eyes. Christ, does the girl not understand? Does she truly not know the truth? He had spoken those words only to distract her, yet he had not lied. Struck by the pain and unease radiating from her, for a moment he forgot where he was. He forgot that his men could be watching them. He forgot that she and he were irreconcilable enemies. He, the outlaw who had dared to kidnap her. She, the daughter of the man who had taken his own son. He leaned in slowly, letting a calloused hand brush the disheveled braid.
"Yes, maiden," he murmured, his voice hoarse.
His fingers traced the rough dark strand. "You are beautiful. Christ, your eyes are abysses a man could lose himself in. And your hair." He knelt on one knee, and reached with the other hand to undo the tie holding the braid. His fingers wove through the strands, freeing the soft weight of her hair.
"It's magnificent," he whispered.
"I have never touched hair so soft." For a moment she seemed unable to respond, clinging to those words like a castaway to a piece of driftwood.
But soon she snapped out of the trance. She pulled away abruptly, snatching the strand from his hand, and glared at him.
"You'll need more than flattery to move me, Scotsman," she said firmly, arching an eyebrow with haughty irony. "If you truly intend to earn my favor, start by releasing my fists. They hurt." Coinneach considered her request. It was not without logic, yet he had no intention of spending the night watching over that untamable beast. She lifted her chin defiantly, eyes burning with indignation.
"I am not a beast to be kept chained."
"No," he admitted in a weary murmur. "You are not, maiden." He sighed and instead of moving around her, leaned closer, slipping his arms around her body while feeling for the rope binding her wrists. And he realized his mistake. He should have positioned himself behind her. That would have been sensible. But there he was, holding her, chin resting on her shoulder, lips dangerously close to the warmth of her neck. The slight shiver she gave was almost imperceptible, yet Coinneach felt it like a lash. "Christ, it's been too long since I've been this close to a woman." He felt the press of her breasts rise and fall against his torso, stirring his own body with immediate urgency. He restrained himself from burying his face in her hair, and inhaling that wild, wholly feminine scent that intoxicated him. He had to remember who she was. Who he was.
That they were not alone.
And yet he could not help it. He leaned closer to reach the rope, brushing his body against hers. "Tell me, maiden," he murmured lightly, "you are not thinking of escaping, are you?" She fell silent, and her quiet unsettled him. "Promise me you will not run," he insisted, halting his hands as he waited for her reply. She took a moment to answer, then spoke with icy sharpness. "And if I could not promise it? Would you release me anyway?" Coinneach smiled. A woman of her word, without doubt.
"No, maiden."
He brushed her hair with his lips, then moved them away with his chin. Some strands stuck to his mouth, and he tasted them without thinking, eyes closing. A fleeting vision struck him, that silky hair falling over his face as she rode him. Desire pierced him like a burning spear. "I will not," he added in a hoarse voice. "I will not let you go, if you do not give your word." She seemed to shrink, as if she wished to sink into the earth. "In that case," she replied with a hint of irony, "I promise not to try." He laughed softly. "You promise not to try?" "I have been clear, Scotsman." Coinneach could not see her, but he imagined her frown and stubborn mouth perfectly. He chuckled softly, sliding his lips near her ear.
"Swear you will not run."
She gasped as he brushed his mouth against her neck, then pulled back sharply.
"Very well, Scotsman.
I will not run. But release me now." He laughed again. "Step away from me," she ordered furiously. "I cannot bear your touch." The shine in her eyes betrayed her. She had felt what he felt. Coinneach was certain. Yet there was a note of desperation in her voice that he did not wish to fan. "Will you keep your word?" he asked gravely. She sighed, exasperated. "With the man who betrayed my father, of course I will. Now let me go." He could not suppress his laughter at her sharpness. "I cannot argue," he admitted, and began to untie the rope. "I have found the perfect solution." Oh really? Her bewilderment amused him. A way out that will satisfy us both, he said with malice. And deep down God knew the very thought filled him with happiness. Spring in the north. Nòraid straightened stiffly at the man's comment. A solution that would satisfy both of us? No, she could not believe it. She tried to contain the panic, searching for any sliver of alternative, forcing her mind not to dwell on the suffocating closeness. Because he felt unbearably near, as if his very presence had invaded every fiber of her being. His weight did not press on her, and yet she felt it in every brush, in every inch, as if fate had fused them in illicit contact. By all the saints, she had never been so aware of herself, of the places where MacCoinnich's skin brushed hers, igniting a forbidden fire that made her feel for the first time, like a woman of flesh and desire. A knot tightened her throat. He had said she was beautiful. Could he have meant it? The thought made her shiver in a way she should not have for an enemy. She furrowed her brow, furious with herself. Of course he isn't sincere. It must be a trick, a mere game of the savage. She knew her face, her limits. She was no fairy creature capable of stealing a man's heart with a single glance. She was insignificant. Her hair was not golden as the minstrel sang but the color of wet earth, her skin sun-marked, dotted with freckles across the nose, and her eyes, far from clear as summer skies or green as spring, were simply brown and dull. Desolation pierced her, for a moment. Foolish girl. What else could she expect from a disbelieving barbarian who never honored his word? She twisted beneath him abruptly, wanting to push him away. The man let out a muffled growl. I would not do that if I were you, he warned in a hoarse voice. And why are you taking so long? Nòraid challenged. Does a mere knot defeat you? By hell, woman, I am doing what I can. I did not tie this cursed rope, and believe me, it is no simple knot. His murmur was a torrent of Gaelic curses. Desperation gripped her. She raised her knee and struck him in the leg. Trying is not enough, she hissed. He let out a strangled groan, and just then the rope gave way. Nòraid sprang up like a coiled spring, longing for freedom, but in a blink the Scotsman caught her, threw her onto her back on the ground, and pinned her with his body firm and unyielding. You have not been very kind, maiden, he growled, eyes burning like embers. Neither was it my intention, she shot back, face flushed with anger and tears that refused to fall. And what did you expect from me, he continued, voice broken with fury. That I would thank you. You kidnapped me. You tied me to a tree like a beast. And you still expect compassion. Finally, the tears overcame her. They fell silently down her cheeks, soaking the earth. She bit her lip to stifle a sob, but could not prevent the words from escaping in a pleading whisper. You have your son, let me go. I can find my way back, please. MacCoinnich averted his gaze, and when he raised it again, his eyes were an impenetrable wall. I cannot, maiden. You do not want to, she accused. Call it that, if you wish, he replied with a calm that hurt more than a shout. My father. Nòraid sobbed. He interrupted her, with the harshness of a sentence. Your father is a bastard. She went pale. You deny the obvious. He dealt with you in good faith. The Scotsman clenched his jaw, fighting an emotion he would not show. Your father conspired with Davy to take my son. Nòraid shook her head violently. You lie. It was your king who plotted with Intrigues. My father only obeyed, sheltering the boy by order of the King of England. Nothing more. MacCoinnich fell into harsh silence. She, noticing a crack in his anger, rushed to add. They told him you mistreated him. That Arhane remained silent, out of fear of your retaliation. My father believed he was saving him. Don't you see? You are mistaken. Hope pounded in her chest like a drum. Now you have your son, let me go. No, maiden. The few illusions she had woven shattered in an instant. You are despicable, she spat, struggling. Move. MacCoinnich obeyed, but only just enough. He sat beside her, face shadowed by a torment she could not decipher. "I have sworn to make your life a hell," Nòraid shot at him, voice breaking. "And I will keep my word." "And I have sworn that you will follow me," he replied, with the serenity of a prophecy. Night descended, wrapping the land in shadows. Nòraid felt the darkness seep into her chest. The pain in her wrists replaced the numbness, and she rubbed her hands, welcoming the sting as a distraction. Suddenly he grasped her wrist firmly, without hurting her. "I will tie you to me," he said gravely. She looked at him in disbelief. "Do you call that freedom?" "It is the only thing I can offer you." Nòraid snorted, resigned. "What a choice." "Tie me then." He joined his hand to hers with a firm knot. Then he removed the red and black tartan plaid. He muttered another Gaelic curse when the fabric resisted, and lifted his eyes to her, as if expecting help.
"Not a chance," Nòraid spat.
A crooked smile touched the warrior's lips. "It never occurred to me," he said. He spread the tartan and settled on it, offering her the other half. She hesitated, but finally copied him, taking as much fabric as she could. MacCoinnich arched an eyebrow, amused, but said nothing. She turned her back to him, curling under the shared blanket, her heart pounding like a war drum. To her surprise, he did not protest when she passed him a piece of the cloth. He simply lay down on it, half on the blanket, half on the bare ground. Is this his idea of chivalry? Fine, she had no intention of being polite. "Coinneach." Angus's voice broke in from above. His face twisted into a smirk as he watched them.
"What a touching sight," he added with a crooked smile.
Nòraid turned away, uncomfortable under that intrusive gaze. "What is it, Angus?" Coinneach asked calmly. "It's Chan," the other replied, and suddenly a trace of concern appeared on his features. He leaned toward MacCoinnich, and whispered in his own tongue. "Then go fetch him," Coinneach answered in English, firm though with a hint of irony.
"But do not torment yourself too much.
We're talking about Chan the meddler. He has likely been distracted by something, as usual." "Perhaps you are right," Angus admitted after a pause. "He always does the same. He will appear when he pleases. Rest then." "Good night, Coinneach." "Good night, Angus." "Try to sleep," Coinneach replied with an almost paternal gesture. "I will try," the man answered, turning with a mocking flourish, a hint of lasciviousness in his lips. "And you as well, Coinneach." He left shortly after, leaving them in a barely apparent solitude. They were surrounded by a horde of warriors, though the thick woods offered a deceptive shelter. Spring in the north lacked the gentle warmth of other lands. Without the sun, the night was cold though serene. Nòraid lay there, gazing at the still bare branches until they merged with the shadows against the night sky. Her eyes settled on the stars, white as ice. The night before, when she had dared to swim beneath their glow, those same lights had seemed like distant bonfires, promises of summer breezes. Now they rose cold and unreachable. A shiver ran through her skin, and she curled up under the blanket. Then she heard the soft steps of Arhane, coming to lay his bed beside the other side of his father. Father and son began speaking in their native tongue, and soon MacCoinnich let out a quiet laugh. Nòraid felt the sting of envy and pushed it away with fury, ashamed of herself. Why should I envy a child the attention of his own father? Because of Coinneach, she told herself bitterly. He had stormed into her life like a tempest, forcing her to relive emotions she thought long buried. Well then, he would not think he had won. That night she would have the last word, or rather the last note. She prayed her voice would keep them awake until dawn, until they had no choice but to hold their eyelids open with twigs like fairground dolls. She waited patiently for darkness to envelop the camp, waited until she believed she could hear the steady breathing of sleep all around, and then she closed her eyes, full of air and defiance. Chapter 10. In the Scottish mist, her voice becomes destiny. Coinneach had barely surrendered to sleep, when a murmur of song drifted through the shadows. It was neither a cry nor a challenge, just a low melody, almost a whisper blending with the first light of dawn. Yet it was enough to wrench him from his brief rest. He opened his eyes with a grim expression, instantly recognizing the girl's voice. For all the devils! I should have known this peace wouldn't last. Beside him Arhane stirred, caught between sleep and wakefulness. Around them one by one the men began to stretch and yawn, some muttering, others letting slip muffled curses. And she, oblivious to their irritation, persisted in singing an English ballad with stubborn brightness. Soft blows the western wind, the rising sun shines, the earth awakens in sweetness. The voice was clear, tuned, almost sweet. And yet at that moment, it felt like a thorn. Coinneach stayed silent, teeth clenched, promising himself he would not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. When the melody paused, he let out a relieved sigh. Perhaps she had understood. But then the young woman resumed the verse. Louder. Thomas's grunt was immediate.
For God's sake, Coinneach.
Can't you make her shut up? Between snorts and protests, Angus muttered. Damned stubborn Englishwoman. Coinneach was about to put an end to it, when a colossal insect flew down his throat. He coughed violently, choking. In desperation, he ended up covering the girl's mouth with his own hand. Christ, did she smile beneath my fingers, mocking me? She did not stop singing, though her voice was muffled under the pressure of his palm. At least let her change the song, Tormod muttered. Coinneach shot upright, still coughing, dragging her with him. He swallowed the damned bug, and barely managed to croak out. Stubborn. A new spasm shook him. Stubborn and unbearable. Then a small pleading voice broke the air. Father, may she keep singing? Coinneach looked at him, incredulous. But Arhane, eyes wide, repeated with a frankness that stole his breath. I don't want her to stop. Please. Silence fell like a blanket over the camp. The men held their peace. The girl paused, surprised. The boy lifted his gaze toward her, his voice trembling in the dim light. My mother never sang for me. God took her when I was born. Could you? Coinneach's heart clenched with a pain that left him disarmed. He had never wept for Isabel, yet those innocent words tore at him more than any reproach ever could. He opened his mouth to refuse, but Thomas interrupted him, voice hoarse with emotion. Coinneach, damn you. Let the girl sing for the boy.
Yes, Tormod added, grave.
The little one has never had a lullaby. Let her. Coinneach closed his eyes, defeated, and muttered bitterly. Traitors. If she wants to. The reply came soft, unexpected. All right. I will sing. She did not look at him, but at the boy, and that unsettled him more than her defiance. Arhane settled between them with a natural ease that left him speechless, as if the space had always been his. Do you know any Scottish songs? The boy asked, hopeful. I know one, she admitted, but not the words. The boy lowered his gaze, disappointed. In that gesture, Coinneach felt the full weight of all his son had lost. Everything he had, unintentionally denied him. The young woman cleared her throat, hesitant. I can hum it. And then in the dim light, her voice began to rise. First timid, barely a thread, then steadier, warmer. Not words, but an ancient melody that seemed to awaken from the very stones of the Highlands. A cadence that enveloped the boy, the men, and even Coinneach himself, as if the ghosts of the past had returned to offer, at last, a lullaby. His heart quickened. Where had he heard that song before? It seemed strangely familiar, though hearing it on English lips made it all the more unsettling. He tried in vain to recall its title. The girl continued to hum, and from the mists of his memory something struggled to surface, a sweetly painful echo so distant and blurred it seemed impossible to pin down. A female voice, warm, enveloping, almost maternal. It was not Isabel's. He had never heard her sing. Nor Blathnad's. Then, whose? His heart pounded in his temples when suddenly, a forgotten verse forced its way into his mind. Hush, little one, my sweet lamb. When you grow, you will follow your father. Coinneach shivered, as if struck by an invisible lightning bolt. Stunned, he buried his face in the plaid and, eyes fixed on the shadows where the two slept beside him, tried to retrieve that elusive memory. Hush, little one, my sweet lamb. You'll bring me a rooster, a goat, and a dove, he murmured, desperate to catch the words. Unconsciously he began to hum along with the girl, his voice hoarse, uncertain. And you'll carry them home in an embroidered sack. Christ! He remembered no more. His chest hammered, uncertainty maddened him. Whose voice was that resonating inside him? His mother's? No. Impossible. She had died giving birth. He could never have heard her cry, much less a song from her lips. Then who? His hands were sweaty, his throat burning. Still he kept murmuring, unaware of how clumsy and off-key his singing was, or that his men were watching in silence, bewildered, as he babbled like a possessed man. Lamb. Thomas suddenly whispered, his voice deep, weary, tinged with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. Coinneach looked at him, astonished. What did you say? My beautiful lamb. That's how it continues, the old warrior replied, and with a murmur that seemed to rise from his very gut he intoned, Hush, little one, my beautiful lamb, bring me offerings, my sweet treasure. He waited until the girl reached the same point in the ballad, then his baritone joined hers. One by one the other men began to join, as if the ancient melody had opened a crack in their weariness. Coinneach could barely contain a bitter smile, as he realized the girl's plan had ended up ensnaring them all. Then he noticed Tormod had produced an old clarinet, accompanying them with deep, piercing notes, as if summoning the very soul of the Highlands. The melody unfolded, clear as the dawn wind. The hare of the forest, the stag of the hill, the goose of the lake, the trout of the bridge. In unison, the men murmured along. And in Coinneach's mind the female voice of memory continued, sweet and distant as a ghost. Hush, little one, my sweet child, close your tired heavy eyes, dream through the night, dream without fear, awaken tomorrow to the sun in the sky. When the final verse faded, Arhane slept curled against the girl, so closely entwined it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. The gentle rhythm of his breathing revealed a deep, serene slumber. Coinneach remained still, chest tight, letting the clarinet's notes dissolve into the morning. Still wondering whose voice his memory had summoned from the abyss of time. At last, in a low murmur, he asked, How do you know this melody? Allah said. Maiden. Allah said. Nòraidh whispered, barely audible. I was going to call you by your name. She fell silent, cheeks flushing. She could not confess the truth, that his father had known another maiden. The thought alone scorched her tongue.
It's a friend, Arhane improvised, his voice trembling.
My name is Nòraidh. Good heavens! What had she hoped to accomplish with that confession? Surely not that her voice and melody would be followed by a chorus of rugged Highland men, as if they were drunken bards. And yet, she had done it. For the boy, of course. Always for him. Just like herself. Her heart ached when Arhane, nestled in her lap, whispered her name. Nòraidh had feared the MacCoinnich would hear and shame her. But he had not reacted, only the little one had asked sweetly for a song. How could she refuse when even the warriors had surrendered? Thank you, the MacCoinnich murmured suddenly, voice deep, near, too near. Nòraigh's throat constricted. In that suffocating intimacy, with his son asleep between them, how could she hold on to anger? How could she resist the warmth that surrounded them? You were not obliged, girl, he added softly like a sigh among shadows. But you have my gratitude. Nòraidh swallowed, silent for a moment. Then, in a thread of a voice, she dared. If you are so grateful, will you return me to my father? The plea burned in her chest. She needed to flee for her own good. Because a part of her, the most treacherous, wanted to stay. All for a shared ballad at the whim of a child. What a foolish heart she had. Silence hung heavy. She insisted, almost desperately. Will you take me back? The MacCoinnich exhaled a harsh breath, the answer she both feared and longed for. No, girl. Nòraidh let out the air she hadn't known she'd been holding. Was it relief she felt? Or disappointment? God alone could tell. She did not protest, she had no strength. The clarinet's music dissolved like smoke.
When I first heard Arhane speak, I thought he didn't know English, Nòraid said, with a hint of reproach.
Of course he knows it, Coinneach replied. And I will teach him Latin as well. She blinked, incredulous.
You speak Latin?
Do you think only the English have a right to the language of God? She bit her lip. Shame cut deep. Even she, an English lady, had been denied that knowledge. And there was this barbarian, with an education she had never been afforded. Never had she felt more acutely like the poor relation, the unworthy shadow. She felt the slight tug of his arm as he turned toward her. The boy slept peacefully upon him, and though her limbs grew numb, she would not have moved for the world. There was something infinitely sweet in holding a little one who trusted her so completely. And something infinitely dangerous in lying so close to his father. Coinneach, she repeated in her mind, the name Thomas had spoken, savoring it like a secret. She dared to look at him in the dim light, heart racing. When we were at my father's house, Arhane never spoke to me, she confessed. The MacCoinnich fell silent for a moment that seemed eternal. Then in a deep voice, he asked the question that pierced her. If it were you, what would you have done? Nòraid hesitated. If I had been a girl, alone in the hands of strangers. Her gaze fell on the little one, motionless beside her. I don't know. She was only afraid, he said with calm gravity. I would have been afraid too, she admitted. And now, girl. His voice dropped a tone, brushing against the intimate. Are you afraid? Nòraid swallowed. And you, she dared. Are you? Afraid of what?
That I might harm you.
Silence thickened like fog. At last the answer came, heavy, burning, like a secret torn from the soul. No. You have nothing to fear from me. His voice softened, husky and caressing, and Nòraid's pulse raced to vertigo. That timbre intoxicated her, carried her away like a Celtic spell. Then what should I fear, she whispered, daring more than she intended. He let the silence torment her before replying, barely a murmur.
That I might desire you.
The world tipped in her chest.
Why you? She stammered, breathless.
Me? That's impossible. The MacCoinnich's deep laughter enveloped her, like a wave of heat. His hand found hers in the darkness and drew it slowly, resting it over his body. Nòraid felt the heat of his virility, firm and throbbing beneath the fabric, and her breath caught. Instinct screamed that she should pull away, but she did not.
You don't seem so surprised, girl, he purred, leaning toward her.
Nòraid's body shivered secretly as she felt him approach, so close that only the sleeping child separated them. And against all reason, she wished there were no barrier between them.
She tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. Yes, girl, he murmured, voice vibrating like a dark command.
If my son were not between us, you would have much to fear. Her breath broke into a gasp. Nòraid found no words to answer. Silence wrapped around her as her mind spun endlessly. How had they ended up here? She had begun with the firm intention of provoking him, of making him curse her presence, and yet, instead, she found herself pleading with reckless questions as if she longed for his arms. Her plan had been simple, to exhaust the Scots with forced wakefulness, to deprive them of sleep. And yet it was she who could not close her eyes. Conscious of every breath, every movement of the man beside her, of Arhane's little body sleeping between them, and of the rope that still bound her to the MacCoinnich. It would have been enough to move the child's head aside, and she could free herself.
But she did not have the courage to disturb that innocent sleep.
And when Coinneach, in an involuntary shift, drew her closer in an embrace that enveloped the three of them, Nòraid found herself unable to resist. She could not deny the devastating sweetness of that moment. She closed her eyes, vowing to keep the memory of that warmth, of that fleeting illusion of belonging deep in her heart. And worse, she nestled into that refuge to stave off the morning chill. That morning, she promised herself, she would think of escape. When reason outweighed temptation. That morning, however, she needed that warmth more than air. She could pretend it was a passing desire, until one last cruel, relentless dream stole even that from her. Chapter 11. The Rose and the Clan. The morning revealed itself more cruel than the dawn itself. Nòraid woke shivering, wrapped in a void that returned with the same stubbornness as a wound that would not heal. The highland mist filtered a weak sun, incapable of warming stone or bone, and the grey sky promised an icy rain that would soon fall upon them. She had to flee. That very day. There had to be a way to escape that captivity, to rid herself of those men, of him. MacCoinnich was already up, as was his son, leaving her alone on the plaid, as if the shared warmth of the early hours had been a mirage.
What had she expected of him? She told herself with bitter irony.
A kiss at dawn from the proud MacCoinnich? A hug from his son? No. They were not her family. They were her jailers, and nothing more. It did not matter that the night before they had shared a fleeting moment of tenderness, it meant nothing. Or at least not to them. To her, however, it meant everything. That memory still burned in her chest, a brief feeling of belonging so intense and beautiful that the harshness of the morning could only tear at her with its absence. She covered her eyes with one arm, as if she could ward off the light of dawn and the weight of her own shame. The warmth she had felt beside him had nothing to do with her boldness or with the crude temptation to which she had been exposed. And yet her cheeks burned as she recalled the place where her hand had dared to lose itself. He had declared that he desired her. And there was no need to ask to what end. May God have mercy on her soul. There had been a moment of weakness in her, in which a mere promise of tenderness would have been enough to make her throw herself into his arms, when what she should have done was flee in indignation. Was she so thirsty for affection, that she would accept drinking from a spring that could ruin her? Yes. The answer, brutal in its clarity, made her shudder. She sighed in annoyance at the direction her thoughts were taking. Nothing would change. She did not belong to that family, just as she had never belonged to any. Giving herself to MacCoinnich, sacrificing her body on the altar of desire, would not fill that void. And her father was waiting for her. That was what she tried to remember, as one fans a spark of hope. She had to return to him. At any price. She sat up, leaning her back against an oak and hugging her knees. From there she watched MacCoinnich with his men, huddled in council, speaking in that harsh and musical tongue that was foreign to her. She did not try to decipher it. Her eyes instead sought Arhane, the boy who stood by a tree, head bowed and shoulders slumped. Poor child, she thought. There was sadness in his bearing, as if the weight of orphanhood crushed him even in the silence of the morning. She remembered the pain in his voice in the early hours when he spoke of the mother he had never known, and felt something break within her. Nòraid knew what it meant to grow up without a mother, and also without a father, though in her case the wound was different. Hers had renounced her as soon as she was born, hiding away in a convent, ashamed of the daughter who carried her blood. Her father had never forgiven her. He said he had loved that woman more than anything in the world, and that Nòraid had been the cause of his loss. Since then she had borne that guilt. Had she cried too much as a child? Had she been too demanding? Was that why her father looked at her with contempt? She shook her head. What was done was done. Her mother had died years earlier, consumed by consumption between stone walls and prayer. All that remained was to reconcile with her father. And the sooner she returned to MacAilpein, the sooner she could achieve it. A wave of anger swept through her. Her gaze sought MacCoinnich, hard, unassailable, and the question stabbed her again, were the stories that accused him of murdering his wife true? For some reason, Nòraid could not believe it. She scarcely knew him, but he did not seem a man capable of raising his hand against an innocent woman. Then she frowned. What if his wife had not been so innocent? It was evident that MacCoinnich had had more than one opportunity to hurt her, had he wished to. And yet he had never raised a hand against her. Though the night before the desire in his eyes had been so fierce that he might have. Nòraid could not help a mischievous glint from curving her lips, as she recalled her own audacity. Holy Mary! What would she not give to see again the expression on the warrior's face, when she with untamed fury had begun shouting in his ear. That moment when he had failed to silence her. Oh, how she would have liked to sear that frustrated grimace into the memory of the haughty Highlander. A light, clandestine laugh slipped from her throat before she bit her lip and regained her composure. She knew that man was dangerous, that he walked beneath the shadow of a reputation of iron and blood. And yet, why did his presence not terrify her as it should? She frowned. She remembered her former fear, but now the Scots' contained fury struck her as almost amusing. And that was strange, because MacCoinnich's fame preceded him like a drawn sword. Warriors and peasants throughout Scotland, and even beyond in England, knew the stories that surrounded him. The darkest of all, it was said that he had thrown his wife from the tower on the very morning his son was born, when she was no longer useful to him. She had given him an heir, nothing more was required of her. Others whispered that in the Highlands, his influence rivaled that of King Davy himself. That the clans revered him as their true lord, and that the monarch of Scotland loathed a loyalty that slipped beyond his crown. Perhaps for that reason, Nòraid reflected, Davy had ordered the kidnapping of little Arhane, and his delivery to an English earl.
Not to protect him, but to keep his father bound.
Lost in that thought, Nòraid rose with the resolve to lift the boy's spirits. At dawn he had accepted her comfort, and perhaps he would now as well. Later she would find a way to flee, yes, but for now she could at least offer a ray of relief to that childish heart. She could show him that surviving was possible. As she approached, she noticed Arhane humming something to himself. Her heart trembled with a stab of tenderness at the sound of that melody. A vague memory flared in her mind, like an echo of childhood, herself stretched out in a field of golden wheat, humming among white clouds drifting across a pale sky. A lullaby to ward off loneliness. Sleep, my little one, the boy murmured in his musical Highland cadence. When you are grown, with your father you will go. Nòraid smiled, moved by his sweet babble and by the way he swayed to the rhythm of the song. You will bring me a rooster, a goat and a dove, the little one continued to sing. Just then Nòraid reached him and gently laid a hand on his back, offering shelter. But Arhane broke off the tune abruptly and turned toward her, his face drawn into a wary grimace. She noticed he was hiding something beneath his tunic, shielded by the plaid. Suspicion darted through her mind like an arrow. Was he concealing a theft? Her father had always insisted that the Scots were a people of thieves. With an instinctive gesture, Nòraid felt for her own braid and checked, relieved that her treasure was still there, the braided gold cord she had torn from her father's cloak. It still gleamed tangled in her hair, like a thread of sunlight in a disorderly nest. She turned back to Arhane, intrigued. What are you doing? She asked softly. The boy still watched her with narrowed eyes, weighing whether he should trust her. At last he murmured with solemnity. I'm painting. Nòraid raised her eyebrows. Painting, she repeated, surprised. A spark of tenderness slipped into a smile. Oh, I see. She bent down beside him, with the patience one would use to approach a skittish fawn. Will you let me see your painting? She whispered, softening her voice. I like to paint very much too, you know. The boy hesitated, his mouth pressed into a stubborn line. Finally he yielded with a resigned snort. All right. I suppose so, the child murmured, with the gravity of an old man who already knows his defeats. It always happens to me. And taking between his fingers a stick blackened from the fire, he let the charcoal crumble into a fragile line upon the damp earth of the Highlands. I never finish it. I run out of charcoal. He lifted his gaze to her, frowning with an indignation so childlike that Nòraid found it impossible to contain the laugh that struggled to escape. Coinneach could scarcely believe it, though the evidence burned before his eyes. The girl had gone utterly still when he called her by her true name. Absolute stillness, as if she were a statue carved of marble and breath. The night before he had heard Arhane speak it as well, but he had dismissed it as a trick of the ear, a light dream or the mischievous echo of the fire. Now there was no room for doubt. The boy had repeated it, and in that instant everything fell into place. For a moment he let himself be distracted by the child's antics, by his innocent little work of art, but the truth, like a red-hot iron, had driven itself into his mind. He had to know. He had to wrench the confession from her. And he already knew it. The answer was written in the stiffness of her shoulders, in the way she avoided his eyes, in that silent plea cast toward the sky, as if begging for mercy. Her silence was confession enough. A shudder ran through him, and fury rose in his chest like an untamed fire. He could taste it, bitter on his tongue, heavy in his veins. He could smell it, like the stench of rotting flesh. Had MacShimidh appeared before him at that moment, Coinneach would have torn out his heart with his bare hands and forced him to swallow it, if that cursed spawn even possessed a heart at all. May the devil take that bastard. What kind of man denied a name to his own daughter? What monster reduced his own blood to a mere title, to a soulless label? Nòraidh. It was not a name, but a sentence. A cold tag for someone of flesh, blood and spirit. Coinneach's jaw tightened, until he thought he felt the iron of his own rage crack against his teeth. He muttered a curse beneath his breath, and swore with the solemnity of a blood oath, that if he ever came face to face with the man who dared call himself the girl's father, he would strangle him with his own hands until he begged. He remained there, unable to decide his next move, his gaze fixed on the girl's back. She too was trembling. By the Holy Christ, never before had a word of his, a single gesture, shaken her so deeply. He cursed again and spun away abruptly, unable to bear her face or force her to meet his. Blind with fury, he nearly collided with Angus. Coinneach, his man announced gravely. Chan has not yet returned. Coinneach hurled a dark curse, like a smothered thunderclap. Form a search party, he ordered in a steely voice. By God, when we find him, I swear I'll strangle him with these hands. Chapter 12. In the name of the clan. They scoured the forest with fury, hacking a path with blows of steel, tearing away flowering vines and shredding the undergrowth as if the very earth were complicit in his disappearance. Angus and Chan had been friends since childhood, and the former's unease grew with every step, visible in his darkened eyes and in the increasingly harsh rhythm of his breathing. The night before, Coinneach had not been overly concerned. He had believed Chan needed time to cool his blood, perhaps a gesture of protest after his decision to take the girl with them. He knew that many of his men had not looked kindly on that unexpected burden. The name she herself had chosen had displeased him from the start, but that other one, the one she had received from her own father. Nòraidh. It was not even a true name, merely a hollow word, a soulless label. The affront rekindled Coinneach's anger, and with a brutal slash he split a thick tendril with the flat of his sword, as if he could cut away as well the vileness the girl had endured. Saints above, he growled under his breath. Where in hell has Chan gone? No matter how angry he might be, deep down Coinneach knew his cousin would never have abandoned him. And certainly not without his horse. His thoughts dragged him unwillingly back to the young woman. He shook his head in bitter disbelief. How could a man, a father, allow his own blood to be handed over to the enemy? The mere memory of MacShimidh made his jaw clench. Not even if Isabel had betrayed him in his bed, and the child born were not his, Coinneach knew he would have loved that child with all his heart. Because blame never fell on the children. Never. Such contempt for one's own blood was in his eyes a sacrilege that cried out for justice. And if the Almighty did not act soon, he himself would show MacShimidh an earthly hell that would surpass any eternal punishment. Search the thickets, he ordered, his deep voice booming like a war drum. A chill ran down his neck. Until then they had found no sign at all, no tracks, no broken branches, not the slightest hint of a struggle. Nothing. He couldn't have gone far without his horse, he murmured, reasoning aloud, though in his mind he kept returning like a persistent echo to the girl. Alice. That was a name worthy of Scotland. A name with roots and pride. The anger flared again in his veins. Exasperated by the fruitlessness of the search, he brought his sword down against the crown of a shrub and called out sharply. Tormod. The young man came at once. Take Beethan and Cerwyan. Circle to the right. Then he turned to his cousin, whose expression was granite. Angus, you take Siamas and Mael Coluim to the left. Angus nodded without reply and obeyed at once. Coinneach kept the 2 remaining men at his side. He had left most of the others guarding Nòraidh and his own son Arhane. The last thing he would allow was for the boy to fall again into MacShimidh's clutches. He had no certainty that anyone was pursuing them, but he had no intention of tempting fate. With MacShimidh, the trap could lurk in every shadow, distracting them with each man's disappearance while he seized the boy. He might not lift a finger for his daughter, but for Arhane he would do anything. The Englishman would have to answer to his king for losing him, and that burden could drive him to any depravity. That was why Coinneach had abandoned the old safe road, choosing the rough path that led straight into the Highlands. The land itself, untamed and cruel, was the best guardian against strangers. And in secret, he had also wanted to draw Nòraidh away from the easiest route. He could not bear the thought of her fleeing into the arms of the one who had denied her. The memory of her face, that shattered expression when he returned with Arhane after the negotiation with her father, still haunted him like a dagger lodged in his chest. It was Beithan who found the body. Not long after they had split up. The youth, pale as a corpse, let out a sharp cry, so broken and piercing that it sounded like the wail of a woman possessed by terror. Coinneach spun on his heel and hurled himself into the brush, shoving aside branches as if they were mere reeds, leaping over the undergrowth in a frantic sprint. He found him there, doubled over, vomiting violently. "Wolves," the young man gasped, barely able to force out the word. Coinneach followed Beithan's gaze toward the clearing, where Caoilín and Tormod emerged from the brush. They were dragging a body by the armpits, their faces waxen pale, their muscles taut under the weight of the unbearable. At the sight of them, Beithan doubled over again, vomiting with the spasms of a child who has not yet learned to contain his terror. At another time Coinneach might have smiled at such weakness, so unbefitting of the braggart giant. Now the boy's reaction only deepened the shadow of his own anguish. "Some beast devoured him in the night," Tormod murmured, his voice heavy, almost extinguished. "And then buried what was left," Caoilín added, his teeth clenched like stone against stone. "Damn it!" Tormod shook his head, twisting his face. "Only the plaid tells us it's Echan." Coinneach approached slowly, his steps heavy, as though the ground itself resisted him. The men let the body fall, unable to hold it any longer. Before his eyes lay the remains of what had been a brother in blood and arms. Neither Caoilín nor Tormod could bear the sight of the ruined face. They turned away, overcome by horror. "What will we do now?" Caoilín whispered, a tremor in his voice he scarcely dared to release. "What will we tell his mother?" "The truth," Coinneach replied, his eyes fixed on the wooden shaft still protruding from Echan's chest. He bent over the corpse and ran a finger along the broken splinter, as if the touch might draw out a revelation. Perhaps the wolves finished him, but before them there was a man. Silence fell heavy among the trees, broken only by Beithan's ragged breathing. The violence of the ambush must have snapped the arrow in two. Coinneach kept his gaze locked on the projectile, as though a hidden truth still burned there, until Angus, MacAilpein and Siamas burst into the clearing. MacAilpein, upon seeing the body, let out a strangled exclamation. "Holy Christ!" Angus, by contrast, collapsed. He dropped to his knees beside his friend, and a heart-rending cry tore from the depths of his chest. "Cursed fool," he sobbed, pounding the earth with his fists. "Cursed fool, that's all you ever were." Coinneach laid a steady hand on his cousin's shoulder, gripping with the strength of one who wishes to wrench a measure of pain from another's body. "There is nothing we can do now, Angus," he said gravely. The young man lifted his head, eyes flooded, and nodded with difficulty. Mourning was reflected in each of those present, though none dared give it voice. All of them knew the risks they had accepted. Coinneach shrugged off his plaid and tossed it to Tormod, his heart tight with the bitter dignity of duty. "Wrap his body in this," he ordered hoarsely. "He must be buried with the honors of his line. We will take him home." "No." Angus interrupted, his voice in shards, his eyes clouded with tears he refused to show. "Use mine." He tore the plaid from his shoulders, and held it out to Tormod. With a solemn gesture Tormod returned Coinneach's and took Angus's instead. The clan chief closed his fingers around his own cloth, nodding in silence as he saw the resolve in his cousin's eyes. Unable to meet his gaze, Tormod lowered his head. All of them knew how deep the bond between Angus and Echan ran, a tie stronger than the one that bound Coinneach to his own cousin, and that certainty filled him with a quiet desolation. He had had his clan, yes, his father, now his son. But never a true brotherhood like that. As a boy he had envied it, as a man he respected it. As chief, he wept in silence for the loss of one of his own. And so, without a word spoken, they began to wrap the shattered body of Echan in Angus's plaid, red, black and white, the eternal colours of Clan MacCoinnich. Coinneach followed Beithan's gaze toward the clearing, where Caoilinn and Tormod emerged from the brush. They were dragging a body by the armpits, their faces waxen pale, their muscles taut under the weight of the unbearable. At the sight of them, Beithan doubled over again, vomiting with the spasms of a child who has not yet learned to contain his terror. At another time Coinneach might have smiled at such weakness, so unbefitting of the braggart giant. Now the boy's reaction only deepened the shadow of his own anguish. "Some beast devoured him in the night," Tormod murmured, his voice heavy, almost extinguished. "And then buried what was left," Caoilinn added, his teeth clenched like stone against stone. "Damn it!" Tormod shook his head, twisting his face. "Only the plaid tells us it's Echan." Coinneach approached slowly, his steps heavy, as though the ground itself resisted him. The men let the body fall, unable to hold it any longer. Before his eyes lay the remains of what had been a brother in blood and arms. Neither Caoilinn nor Tormod could bear the sight of the ruined face. They turned away, overcome by horror. "What will we do now?" Caoilinn whispered, a tremor in his voice he scarcely dared to release. "What will we tell his mother?" "The truth," Coinneach replied, his eyes fixed on the wooden shaft still protruding from Echan's chest. He bent over the corpse and ran a finger along the broken splinter, as if the touch might draw out a revelation. Perhaps the wolves finished him, but before them there was a man. Silence fell heavy among the trees, broken only by Beithan's ragged breathing. The violence of the ambush must have snapped the arrow in two. Coinneach kept his gaze locked on the projectile, as though a hidden truth still burned there, until Angus, MacAilpein and Siamas burst into the clearing. MacAilpein, upon seeing the body, let out a strangled exclamation. "Holy Christ!" Angus, by contrast, collapsed. He dropped to his knees beside his friend, and a heart-rending cry tore from the depths of his chest. "Cursed fool," he sobbed, pounding the earth with his fists. "Cursed fool, that's all you ever were." Coinneach laid a steady hand on his cousin's shoulder, gripping with the strength of one who wished to wrench a measure of pain from another's body. "There is nothing we can do now, Angus," he said gravely. The young man lifted his head, eyes flooded, and nodded with difficulty. Mourning was reflected in each of those present, though none dared give it voice. All of them knew the risks they had accepted. Coinneach shrugged off his plaid and tossed it to Tormod, his heart tight with the bitter dignity of duty. "Wrap his body in this," he ordered hoarsely. "He must be buried with the honors of his line. We will take him home." "No." Angus interrupted, his voice in shards, his eyes clouded with tears he refused to show. "Use mine." He tore the plaid from his shoulders, and held it out to Tormod. With a solemn gesture Tormod returned Coinneach's and took Angus's instead. The clan chief closed his fingers around his own cloth, nodding in silence as he saw the resolve in his cousin's eyes. Unable to meet his gaze, Tormod lowered his head. All of them knew how deep the bond between Angus and Echan ran, a tie stronger than the one that bound Coinneach to his own cousin, and that certainty filled him with a quiet desolation. He had had his clan, yes, his father, now his son. But never a true brotherhood like that. As a boy he had envied it, as a man he respected it. As chief, he wept in silence for the loss of one of his own. And so, without a word spoken, they began to wrap the shattered body of Echan in Angus's plaid, red, black and white, the eternal colours of Clan MacCoinnich. Chapter 13. Nòraidh's heart. Nòraidh was determined to wrench the truth from the child, the truth that had tormented her so deeply, his stubborn silence in her father's house. Until that moment, Arhane had listened to her without a word, his brow furrowed and his scowl growing ever more offended.
But she did not relent.
She had spent entire weeks trying to draw the fear out of him, striving to earn his trust, always certain that he understood every word she spoke. That he would still refuse to speak to her out of sheer pride hurt her more than she cared to admit. "Why did you never speak to me, Arhane?" she asked firmly, leaning toward him. "Why didn't you let me know you understood my language? I would never have harmed you." The boy shrugged, but his face burned with anger. "Didn't I defend you from my father?" Nòraidh pressed on, settling onto the ground with her knees drawn to her chest. She lifted her gaze toward Thomas and the other men, who continued to move restlessly in circles like caged wolves. She had yet to grasp the reason for that agitation, and it troubled her that they remained there, delaying a departure that seemed imminent. She turned back to the boy. "Why didn't you trust me?" she asked more gently, running her hand over the small mound of earth he had been shaping between them. She helped smooth it, as if the gesture might build a bridge. Her voice dropped, almost a plea. "I can understand that you were afraid of my father. Yours explained that to me. But..." The boy looked at her then, and the indignation in his eyes made her fall silent at once. "Because you said terrible things about my father," Arhane spat, his tone wounded and accusing. "You lied to me. You said he was bad." Nòraidh felt the ground give way beneath her feet. "You tried to make me hate him," the boy went on, his voice breaking with rage.
"But my father is good."
"You don't know him." A sudden heat flooded her cheeks. She had never considered that the child might hear her, much less understand her. She had always believed the worst of MacCoinnich, and now the boy lashed that blindness back at her like a whip. I'm sorry, Arhane," she stammered, unable to hold his gaze. "Perhaps you're right, She did not manage to justify herself. At that very moment, the MacCoinnich men returned from the forest. They emerged like specters, their faces hardened, their eyes lit by a contained fire. Nòraigh's heart leapt. Her gaze fixed at once on the chief, who advanced at the front, imposing with the weight of silence dragging behind him. Coinneach's eyes met hers, and in a single heartbeat she felt the irrepressible urge to flee. Her heart hammered in her chest, and though she understood deep down that his fury was not aimed at her, she trembled. She tried to look away, but it was useless. Then the amber eyes of MacCoinnich settled on his son, and suddenly the rigidity of his body melted, as though an invisible armor had cracked. Only then did Nòraidh notice the burden the men carried on their backs, a body wrapped in a plaid bearing the clan's colors. She understood at once that it was one of theirs, though she did not know which. Her eyes searched their faces, trying to discern which voice was missing from that circle, but she found no answer. She did not yet know those men well enough to recognize the absences. She rose abruptly, horrified, watching as they arranged the body across one of the mounts. The silence that settled around the act was as dense as a funerary prayer. Only then did Nòraidh lower her gaze to Arhane. He was looking at her with eyes full of tears, and in that instant she understood that he already knew who lay beneath the plaid. "Chan," the boy whispered, and a tear slid slowly down his cheek,